I remember the moment I stepped off the marked trail. It didn't feel like a mistake at first. It felt small, almost harmless. Just a narrow path, barely visible between the trees like something animals might use. The kind of thing you notice without really thinking. I told myself it would loop back. Most trails do. I had been hiking for hours already. The main trail was wide, clear, and almost too easy. Gravel under my boots. Occasional wooden signs nailed to trees. It didn't feel like the kind of place where anything could go wrong. Maybe that's why I turned. The smaller path looked quieter, less used. The ground was softer, covered in pine needles instead of packed dirt. My boots made less sound when I stepped onto it. The forest seemed to close in a little, like it was gently pulling me away from everything I had just left behind. I didn't check my map right away. I just kept walking. At first, nothing felt wrong. The trees were tall and straight, spaced far enough apart that I could still see a good distance ahead. The light came through in soft patches, warm and steady. There was a smell of damp earth and old leaves. It was peaceful. Too peaceful, maybe. After 10 minutes or so, I realized I hadn't seen a single trail marker. No painted blazes, no signs, nothing to show that anyone else had come this way recently. That's when I stopped and pulled out my map. I remember unfolding it slowly, like I already knew something wasn't right. The paper felt stiff in my hands. I traced my finger along the main trail, following the path I had been on. Then I looked for the turn. It wasn't there. I checked again, slower this time. I followed every line, every curve. There were smaller paths marked nearby, but none of them matched where I was. None of them branched off at the point where I had turned. I told myself I must have misread it. Maybe I had walked farther than I thought. Maybe I had turned earlier or later. It's easy to get turned around in the woods if you don't pay attention. So I kept walking. The path didn't change. It stayed narrow but clear enough to follow. It didn't feel like something made by accident. The ground was worn down in a way that suggested regular use. Not recent, maybe, but not abandoned either. I started listening more carefully. That was the first time I noticed how quiet it was. Not completely silent. There were still sounds, but they felt distant, faint, like they were happening somewhere else, far beyond the trees. I couldn't hear birds anymore. No insects. Just the soft sound of my own steps and the occasional rustle of leaves when the wind moved through. Even the wind felt slow. I walked for another 15 minutes before I stopped again. This time I turned around. I expected to see the path behind me stretching back the way I had come, but something about it looked different. The trees seemed closer together. The light felt dimmer, even though I knew the sun hadn't moved that much. For a moment, I had the strange feeling that I was looking at a place I hadn't walked through. I shook it off. It was just my imagination. Forests can look different when you turn around. Everyone knows that. The perspective changes. Shadows fall in new ways. Still, I hesitated. Then I started walking back. At least, I thought I was walking back. The path curved gently, just like it had before, but it didn't lead me to the main trail. It didn't open up. It didn't widen. It just kept going deeper into the trees. I stopped again, slower this time. My chest felt tight, but not in a sharp, panicked way. More like a quiet pressure, building little by little. The kind of feeling you get when something is wrong, but you can't explain why. I checked my map again. It didn't help. No matter how I turned it, no matter how carefully I looked, there was nothing that matched what I was seeing around me. No path this narrow, no stretch of forest this dense. It was like I was standing in a place that didn't exist on paper. I remember thinking, maybe the map is old. Maybe this path was made after it was printed. Maybe it just hadn't been updated yet. It sounded reasonable. It felt reasonable. But something inside me didn't believe it. I kept walking anyway. What else was I supposed to do? The path was still there, still clear, still the only direction that made any sense. Stepping off into the trees felt worse. The forest beyond the path looked thicker, darker, like it would swallow me if I tried to cut through. So I stayed on it. I started paying attention to details. The trees were mostly the same kind, tall pines, straight and quiet. Their trunks were dark, almost black in some places. The bark looked rough, but when I reached out and touched one, it felt strangely smooth. That was the first thing that really unsettled me. I pulled my hand back slowly, looked at my fingers. There was a faint stickiness on my skin, not sap, something thinner, almost like moisture. I wiped my hand on my pants and kept moving. I didn't touch any more trees after that. Time started to feel strange. I checked my watch at one point, expecting it to be maybe early afternoon, but it was later than I thought, much later, the kind of time where the light should have started changing, shifting toward evening. But the forest didn't reflect that. The light stayed the same, soft, even, like it wasn't coming from the sun at all, but from somewhere else, something constant. I tried to listen again. Still nothing. No birds, no distant sounds, just that same quiet pressing in from all sides. I called out once, just to test it. Hello. My voice sounded wrong, not louder or softer, just flat, like it didn't carry properly. It didn't echo. It didn't bounce back from the trees. It just disappeared. I didn't try again. As I walked, I started noticing something else. The ground. At first it looked normal. Pine needles, dirt, the occasional rock. But after a while I realized there were no footprints. Not mine. Not anyone's. I stopped and looked behind me. The path was clean. No marks where I had stepped. No disturbed needles. Nothing to show that I had been walking there at all. I slowly lifted my foot and pressed it down again, harder this time. When I lifted it, there was still nothing. That's when the fear really started to settle in. Not sudden, not sharp. Just steady, like a cold weight in my chest. I didn't understand it. I couldn't explain it. But I knew in a quiet, certain way that something about this place was wrong. Not just unusual. Wrong. I kept walking. I don't know how long. It felt like hours. Maybe it was less, maybe more. Time didn't feel real anymore. It stretched and folded in ways that didn't make sense. At some point, I noticed the path beginning to narrow. Not by much, just enough that I had to watch where I placed my feet. The trees leaned closer, their branches reaching inward, casting longer shadows across the ground. The air felt heavier, harder to breathe. I slowed down, and that's when I saw it. Ahead of me, maybe 20 or 30 steps away, there was something on the path. At first, I thought it was a rock, but it didn't look like any rock I had seen before. It was too smooth, too deliberate. I approached it carefully, each step slower than the last. And as I got closer, I realized what it was. A backpack, old, worn, covered in dirt, just sitting there in the middle of the path. I stopped a few feet away from it. My heart was beating faster now, but still quiet, still controlled, like it was trying not to draw attention to itself. I looked around. The trees stood still, silent, watching. There was no sign of anyone else. No movement, no sound. Just the backpack. I crouched down slowly and reached out to touch it. The fabric was damp, cold, like it had been sitting there for a long time, or no time at all. I hesitated for a moment. Then I unzipped it. And as the zipper opened slowly, with a soft dragging sound, I realized something that made my hands go still. I had seen this backpack before. Not here, but earlier. At the trailhead. It had been sitting on a bench near the entrance. I remember noticing it because it looked out of place, like someone had left it behind in a hurry. And now it was here, waiting, far deeper in the forest than it should have been. I didn't look inside. I couldn't. I just stayed there, crouched in the middle of a path that wasn't on any map, holding something that shouldn't have been there. And for the first time since I stepped off the trail, I had the quiet, sinking feeling that I wasn't alone anymore. I stayed crouched there for a long time. My hand was still resting on the zipper of the backpack, but I wasn't moving anymore. It felt like if I made even the smallest sound, something in the trees would notice me. The silence around me wasn't empty. It felt full, like something was listening. I slowly pulled my hand away from the bag and stood up. My legs felt stiff, like I had been sitting there for hours, even though it couldn't have been that long. I told myself to leave it. Just keep walking. But the path ahead didn't feel safe anymore, and the path behind me didn't feel real. So I looked down at the backpack again. Something about it bothered me more than anything else so far. Not just that it was there, but how it was there, placed in the middle of the trail, not dropped or tossed aside, almost like someone wanted it to be found, or wanted me to find it. I swallowed slowly and crouched again. This time I opened it. The zipper made a soft, dragging sound, too loud for a place that quiet. I paused halfway, listening. Nothing moved, so I opened it the rest of the way. Inside, everything looked normal. A folded jacket, a water bottle, a small flashlight, a pack of snacks still sealed, even a phone tucked carefully into one of the inner pockets. I picked up the phone. The screen lit up immediately. No luck. The battery was almost full. That didn't make sense. If this bag had been here for a long time, the phone should have been dead. And if it hadn't been here long, then where was the person who owned it? I checked the time on the phone. It matched mine, but the date was wrong. Off by 1 day. Just one. I stared at it for a few seconds, trying to understand what that meant, but my mind didn't want to go there. It felt easier to ignore it. So I put the phone back, zipped the bag halfway. Then I stood up again and looked around. That's when I noticed the smoke. At first, it was so faint I thought it was just a trick of the light. A thin gray line drifting between the trees, barely visible against the pale air. But it moved, slowly, steadily, rising from somewhere ahead. I didn't think about it too much. I just started walking toward it. Smoke meant people, or at least it should have. The path curved slightly as I moved forward, and the trees began to thin out just a little. The ground changed too. Less pine needles, more dirt. Small patches of ash scattered here and there. The smell reached me before the clearing did. Not strong, just enough to notice. Like something had been burning recently. I slowed my steps. Something inside me was telling me to be careful, not in a loud way, just a quiet, steady warning that settled in my chest. Then I saw the campsite. It wasn't large, just a small clearing surrounded by trees, maybe 10 or 15 steps across. In the center, there was a fire pit made of stones, blackened from use. A thin trail of smoke still curled up from it. The fire had only just gone out. I stood at the edge of the clearing, not stepping in right away. Everything looked normal. Too normal. There were 2 tents set up near the far side, both zipped closed. A couple of folding chairs near the fire. A cooler sitting slightly open, like someone had just reached inside and forgotten to shut it. A metal cup rested on the ground beside one of the chairs. It was still upright. Not knocked over, not disturbed. Just placed. I waited. Listened. Nothing. No voices, no movement inside the tents, no footsteps nearby. Just that same quiet, pressing in from all sides. I stepped into the clearing. The ground felt softer here, like it had been walked on recently. I could see marks now, disturbed dirt, small impressions, but none of them were clear enough to follow. I moved slowly toward the fire pit. The stones were warm. I didn't touch the ash directly, but I could feel the heat from where I stood. Whatever fire had been here, it hadn't been out for long. Minutes, maybe. I turned my head toward the tents. Still nothing. No sound from inside. No movement. I approached the first one carefully. Each step felt heavier than the last. I reached out and touched the fabric. It was warm, too. Not from the sun. The light here didn't feel strong enough for that. Warm from the inside. I hesitated. Then I unzipped it just a little. The sound felt too loud again. I paused halfway, listening. Nothing. So I opened it further and looked inside. It was empty, but not in the way I expected. The sleeping bag was still laid out, slightly wrinkled, like someone had just gotten up. A small pillow rested at one end. A flashlight sat beside it, still on. The light was dim but steady. I stared at it for a moment. Then I reached in and picked it up. It was warm in my hand. I turned it off slowly. The inside of the tent felt colder without it. I zipped it back up and stepped away. The second tent was the same. Empty, but not abandoned. Everything was in place, neat, organized, like whoever had been here planned to come back. I moved toward the cooler next. The lid creaked slightly as I opened it. Inside there were drinks, food, ice that hadn't fully melted yet. I closed it again. My throat felt dry. Not from thirst, from something else. Something I didn't want to name. I turned slowly in a circle, looking at the entire campsite. 2 tents, chairs, fire pit, food, gear, everything exactly where it should be. Except for one thing. The people. I called out. Hello. My voice sounded the same as before. Flat, like it didn't belong to me. No answer came back. I waited. Nothing. I tried again, a little louder. Is anyone here? The words faded into the trees. No echo. No reply. Just silence. I took a step back, then another. My eyes kept moving, scanning the edges of the clearing, the spaces between the trees, the shadows that didn't quite feel like shadows. And then I noticed something else. On the ground near the edge of the campsite, there were footprints. Clear this time. Not like the path. These were deep, defined, pressed into the dirt. I walked closer to them. They led away from the clearing, straight into the forest, all in the same direction, like everyone had left at once. I followed them with my eyes, trying to see how far they went. But they didn't go far. They just stopped. A few steps into the trees. Gone, like the people who made them had simply disappeared. I stood there, staring at the empty ground where the prints ended. My chest felt tight again. That same quiet pressure. Stronger now. I slowly turned back toward the campsite. Everything was still there. Unchanged. Waiting. And for a moment, I had the strange feeling that if I stayed too long, I would become part of it. Another thing left behind. Another sign that someone had been here, and then was. I stepped backward slowly at first, then faster, until I reached the edge of the clearing. I didn't look back again. I just found the path and started walking. The same narrow trail, the same silent forest, but now it felt different, heavier, like it knew I had seen something I wasn't supposed to. I walked faster, not running, just not stopping. The trees seemed closer now, the air colder, and as I moved, I couldn't shake the feeling that the campsite wasn't empty. Not really. It was just waiting for something to return, or for someone new to arrive. And as the path pulled me deeper into the forest, I started to wonder if I had already taken someone else's place. I didn't stop walking until the light began to fade. At least I think it was fading. It was hard to tell in that forest. The sky above the trees never really changed the way it should have. There was no warm orange, no long shadows stretching across the ground. Just that same soft, dim light, slowly thinning like something was turning it down instead of the sun going down. By the time I realized how tired I was, my legs were already shaking. I hadn't eaten. I hadn't had any water since before I stepped off the main trail. And more than that, I didn't know where I was anymore. Not even a little. The path was still there, still leading forward, but it didn't feel like a way out. It felt like something else now. Like it had a purpose. And I wasn't sure that purpose included me leaving. I remember stopping near a cluster of trees that leaned inward, their branches forming a kind of cover. It wasn't a clearing, not really, but it felt like the closest thing to shelter I was going to find. I told myself I would rest for a few minutes, just enough to think clearly again. But I knew, even then, I wasn't going anywhere else that night. So I set up my tent. My hands moved slowly, like they didn't fully belong to me. I had done this so many times before in so many different places. It should have felt routine, familiar, but it didn't. Every small sound felt too loud. The rustle of fabric, the snap of the poles locking into place. Even my own breathing seemed heavier than it should have been. I kept stopping, looking over my shoulder, listening. There was never anything there. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Not from far away, from somewhere close. When the tent was finally set up, I crawled inside and zipped it shut quickly. The sound of the zipper felt like a thin barrier being drawn between me and everything outside. It didn't feel like enough. I sat there for a while just breathing, trying to slow my thoughts, trying not to think about the campsite, or the footprints that had stopped, or the backpack. I reached into my bag and took out a small bottle of water. I drank slowly, careful not to finish it. I didn't know how long I would be here. That thought stayed with me, longer than it should have. I lay back eventually, staring at the fabric ceiling above me. It looked darker than it should have been, not because of the night, but because the light outside didn't feel natural anymore. It felt distant, like it wasn't meant for this place. I closed my eyes. For a while, I think I drifted, not fully asleep, just somewhere in between. That quiet space where your thoughts don't make sense, and time slips past without you noticing. And then I heard it. A step, soft, just outside the tent. My eyes opened slowly. I didn't move. I told myself it was nothing. Just the forest settling, a branch falling, an animal passing through. But then I heard it again. Another step. Closer this time. Slow. Deliberate. I held my breath. The sound circled the tent once, light and careful, like something testing the ground. I could hear the faint crunch of pine needles under weight. Not heavy, but not small either. It wasn't moving like an animal. Animals move quickly. They pause, they dart, they react. This was different. This was measured. Like each step was being placed on purpose. I stayed completely still. My heart was beating faster now, but I tried to keep my breathing quiet. shallow, controlled. The steps stopped, right outside the tent. So close I could feel it, not through touch but through something deeper, a presence, a weight in the air. Then came the breathing. Slow, uneven, like someone trying to remember how. I felt my chest tighten. The sound wasn't loud, it wasn't aggressive, but it was wrong. There was a pause between each breath, too long, like the body making the sound had to think about it before doing it again. In, pause, out, longer pause. Then again. I pressed my hand over my mouth without realizing it. The breathing continued, just outside, close enough that I could hear the faint shift of air against the fabric of the tent. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I didn't even blink. After a while, the steps started again. Slow, careful, moving around the tent. One full circle, then another. Each time the breathing followed. In, pause, out, pause, like it was practicing, learning. My thoughts began to drift in ways I couldn't control. I started wondering if it had been there before I set up the tent, if it had watched me while I worked, if it had followed me from the campsite, or if it had been on the path long before I arrived. The steps stopped again, this time near the back of the tent. I could hear the breathing more clearly now. Closer, and then something touched the fabric. Not a hit, not a push, just a light pressure, like fingers, pressing gently, testing. The material dipped inward slightly. I stared at that spot, unable to look away. The shape wasn't clear, just a faint outline, but it moved, slowly sliding along the surface of the tent, tracing it, as if it was trying to understand what it was touching. My body felt frozen, heavy, like if I tried to move, something would notice, something already too close. The pressure lifted after a few seconds. The fabric returned to normal. The breathing continued. In, pause, out, long pause. Then the steps again. Circling, always circling. I don't know how long it went on. Minutes, hours. Time didn't feel real anymore. At some point, I realized something else. The pattern of the steps was changing. At first, they had been uneven, slightly off, like someone unfamiliar with walking. But now, they were becoming smoother, more consistent. The pauses between steps were shorter. The rhythm more natural, like whatever was out there was getting better at it. My throat felt dry. I wanted to speak, to ask who was there, to make it stop. But I couldn't, because deep down, I already knew something. If I spoke, it might answer, and I wasn't sure. I wanted to hear what it would sound like. The steps slowed again, then stopped, right in front of the tent. The breathing was steady now, still slow but less broken, more controlled, more human. I closed my eyes, not to sleep, just to block it out. But that didn't help, because I could still hear it, still feel it, still know that it was there, waiting, learning. And then very softly, I heard something new, a sound that didn't belong to the forest, didn't belong to breathing, didn't belong to footsteps. It was a voice, faint, unclear, like it was coming from a mouth that wasn't used to forming words. It didn't say anything I could understand. Not fully, just fragments, broken sounds, but hidden inside those sounds, There was something familiar, something that made my chest tighten even more, because it didn't sound like a stranger. It sounded like me. Not exactly, not perfectly, but close enough that I felt it in my bones, like hearing your own voice played back wrong. Slower, distorted, learning. The voice stopped. The breathing stayed. For a long time, nothing else happened. No steps, no movement, just that steady, careful breathing, right outside the thin layer of fabric between us. I don't remember falling asleep. I don't think I really did. But at some point, the sound was gone. When I finally opened my eyes again, the light outside looked the same as it always had. Soft, dim, unchanging. I stayed still for a long time, listening. Nothing. Slowly, carefully, I reached for the zipper. My hand trembled slightly as I pulled it open. The sound felt louder than anything that had happened during the night. I stepped outside. The forest was still, silent, empty, but the ground around my tent was covered in footprints, dozens of them, circling, overlapping, pressed deep into the dirt, and every single one of them looked exactly like mine. I took the job because no one else would. That should have been enough of a warning on its own, but at the time, it felt like luck, the kind of opportunity that just appears when you need it most. I had been out of work for a while, drifting between short-term jobs, never staying anywhere long enough to feel settled. So when I saw the listing, I didn't think too hard about it. Remote fire lookout, deep forest, long hours, good pay. No experience required. There was a number at the bottom of the page. I called it without hesitating. The man who answered didn't sound surprised. His voice was calm, almost tired, like he had been expecting someone to call eventually, just not anyone specific. He asked me a few basic questions. My name, my age, whether I had any medical conditions, whether I was comfortable being alone for extended periods of time. I said yes to everything, even the things I wasn't completely sure about. There was a pause after my last answer, a long one. Then he said very quietly, "You understand you won't be able to leave once you're up there. Not easily." I remember smiling a little when he said that. I thought he meant the distance, the isolation. "I'll be fine," I told him. Another pause. Then he gave me the details. The tower was located far from the main road. I would need to drive as close as I could, then hike the rest of the way. Supplies would be provided at the base station. I would be responsible for monitoring the area, reporting any signs of smoke or fire. Simple work. Quiet work. Exactly what I thought I needed. He told me to arrive before sunset. And then, just before he hung up, he said something else. "Most people don't stay the full week." I didn't ask why. I wish I had. The drive took longer than I expected. The road narrowed the deeper I went, turning from smooth pavement to rough gravel, then to something that barely felt like a road at all. Trees pressed in on both sides, tall and dense, blocking out most of the sky. By the time I reached the end, the sun was already low. There was a small clearing where I parked, just enough space for one or two vehicles. No signs, no markings, nothing to suggest this was an official place. Just a trail leading into the forest, and a wooden post with a faded number carved into it. I grabbed my bag and started walking. The air felt different the moment I stepped into the trees. Cooler, heavier, not in a bad way, just noticeable. The trail was narrow but clear, worn down from use, though not recently. There were no fresh footprints, no signs of anyone else having passed through that day, or the day before. The forest was quiet, Not completely silent, but close enough that I could hear my own breathing more than anything else. I kept walking. The light faded slowly as I moved deeper. Shadows stretched between the trees, blending together until it became harder to tell where one ended and another began. After a while, I saw it. The tower. It rose above the trees, tall and thin. Like something out of place. The wood looked old, weathered by years of wind and rain. A narrow staircase wrapped around the outside, leading all the way to the top. It didn't look welcoming. It looked patient, like it had been standing there for a long time, waiting for someone to arrive. I stood at the base for a moment, looking up. The top was barely visible against the dim sky, a small cabin-like structure with windows on all sides. That was where I would be staying. For a week. I adjusted my bag and started climbing. The steps creaked under my weight, each one making a soft, hollow sound that echoed through the structure. I moved slowly, not because I was tired, but because something about the climb felt exposed. Like I was being watched from below. Or from the trees. I didn't look down. I just kept going. When I reached the top, I pushed open the door and stepped inside. The room was small. Simple. A bed in one corner, a desk near the windows, a radio set resting on top of it, shelves with a few supplies, canned food, bottled water, basic tools. Everything I needed. Everything already there. It felt like stepping into a place someone else had just left. The air inside was still. Stale but not unpleasant. I set my bag down and walked to the window. The view stretched out in every direction. Trees, endless trees. The forest went on as far as I could see, dark and quiet under the fading light. It was beautiful, in a distant, unreachable way. I stayed there for a while just looking, trying to settle into the idea that this was where I would be. Alone. Completely alone. When the light finally dropped low enough, I turned on the small lamp near the bed. The soft glow filled the room, pushing back the darkness just enough to feel safe. I told myself I would get used to it. People do this kind of work all the time. There was nothing strange about it. Nothing to worry about. That's what I told myself. Then I noticed the logbook. It was sitting on the desk, partially open, like someone had been writing in it not long ago. The pages were worn, filled with neat handwriting that covered every line. I sat down and pulled it closer. The first few entries were normal. Dates, weather conditions, notes about visibility, routine observations. Exactly what I expected. But as I flipped further, the writing changed. Not the style. The tone. The entries became shorter, less detailed, more uncertain. One of them caught my eye. I saw something between the trees today, too far to be sure, moved wrong. I frowned slightly and kept reading. Another entry a few days later. Radio picked up something last night, not static, not a voice either. Then another. Don't go down after dark. I paused there. Read that line again. Simple. Direct. No explanation. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the page. My chest felt tight, but I couldn't tell why. It didn't make sense. People write strange things when they're alone for too long. That's normal. The mind plays tricks, fills in gaps. That had to be it. I closed the logbook and pushed it aside. I didn't want to think about it. Not on the first night. Instead, I focused on the routine. I checked the radio. It worked fine. A faint hum of static when I turned it on. No messages. I walked around the room, making sure everything was in place. It was. Nothing out of the ordinary. Eventually, I sat on the bed. The silence up there was different from the forest below. Higher, Thinner, but still heavy, still present. I lay down slowly, staring at the ceiling. The wood above me creaked softly as the structure shifted in the wind, a slow, steady sound, almost rhythmic. I closed my eyes, tried to relax, tried to let the day settle. And for a while it worked. My breathing slowed. My thoughts drifted. The quiet became something I could almost accept. Then the radio made a sound. A soft crackle, barely noticeable. My eyes opened immediately. I stayed still, listening. The static shifted slightly. Not louder, just different, like something had moved through it. I sat up slowly, my gaze fixed on the desk. The radio sat exactly where I had left it, unchanged, but the sound coming from it wasn't the same. There was a pattern now, faint, almost like breathing. In, pause, out. I felt a chill run through me. The same kind of slow, quiet fear that doesn't hit all at once, but settles in piece by piece. I stood up and walked toward it, each step careful, measured. As I got closer, the sound became clearer. Not loud, but steady, consistent. And then, just for a second, the static shifted again. And beneath it, I thought I heard something else. A voice, not speaking, not forming words, just there, waiting. I reached out and turned the radio off. The room fell silent again, but the feeling didn't go away. It stayed with me. That quiet sense that something wasn't right, something I couldn't explain. I stood there for a long time, staring at the radio. Then slowly, I looked toward the windows, out into the dark forest below. And for the first time since I arrived, I had the clear, undeniable feeling that this job had been empty for a reason. I didn't sleep much that first night. Not really. I lay there with my eyes closed, listening to every small sound the tower made. The slow creak of the wood, the faint movement of wind brushing against the walls. It should have been calming, repetitive, predictable. But it was. Every sound felt like it meant something. Every pause between them felt longer than it should have been. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I kept thinking about the radio. That soft, steady pattern. Like breathing. At some point, I must have drifted into a light sleep. The kind where you're not fully gone, just floating on the edge. Because when I opened my eyes again, the light had returned. That same pale, quiet light filtering through the windows. Morning, I assumed, though it didn't feel much different from the night. I sat up slowly, my body stiff, my head heavy. For a moment, everything felt normal again. Just a job. Just a tower in the forest. Just me alone, doing what I came here to do. Then I looked at the desk. And the logbook. It was still there, exactly where I had left it. Partially open. Waiting. I don't know why, but that's what it felt like. Like it had been left for me on purpose. I stood up and walked over, slower than I needed to. My hand hovered over the pages for a second before I touched them. The paper felt dry, rough at the edges. Used. I pulled the book closer and sat down. The earlier entries still looked normal. Clean handwriting, clear thoughts, organized observations. But I didn't stay there long. I flipped forward, further into the later pages. That's where things started to change again. The writing became tighter, more rushed. Lines pressed harder into the paper, as if the person writing had been holding the pen too tightly. One entry stood out. I keep seeing them in the distance, between the trees. They don't move like people. I read it twice, slowly. Then I looked out the window without thinking. The forest stretched out below, calm and still. Nothing moved. Nothing stood out. Just trees. Endless trees. I looked back at the page. They stand too still. Then when I look away and back again, they're closer. I felt something settle in my chest. Not sharp. Not sudden. Just there. Like a quiet weight. I flipped to the next entry. I tried to track one today. Went down before sunset. I shouldn't have. My fingers paused on the page. The ink looked darker here, like it had been written with more pressure. I couldn't hear anything while I was down there, not even my own steps after a while. Then I saw it again, behind a tree, watching. I swallowed slowly. My eyes moved across the words without stopping. It leaned out too far, like it didn't understand how its body worked. I closed the book halfway. Just for a second. Took a breath. The room felt smaller than it had the night before. The walls closer. The windows too open. I stood up and walked to one of them, looking out again. The forest hadn't changed. It still looked quiet. Still looked empty. But now I found myself scanning between the trees, looking for shapes. Anything that didn't belong. I didn't see anything. But that didn't help. I went back to the desk. Opened the logbook again. I didn't want to keep reading. But I also couldn't stop. The next few entries were shorter. Almost fragmented. They don't like the light. I see them more at dusk. They wait until I look away. Then one line, written larger than the others. They're not coming from the forest. I stared at that for a long time, trying to understand what it meant. If they weren't coming from the forest, then where were they coming from? I didn't like where my thoughts were going, so I pushed them aside and kept reading. They watch the tower. I counted 4 last night. They move when I blink. I felt a small, involuntary shiver run through me. I blinked, slowly, then looked toward the windows again. Nothing. Still nothing. But now I couldn't stop thinking about it. About the idea that something could be there, just outside of what I noticed. Just beyond what I could catch. I went back to the book. The handwriting changed again near the end. Less controlled. Uneven. Some words scratched out, rewritten over themselves. I tried the radio. No one answered. They don't come closer when I speak. But they listen. My hand tightened slightly on the edge of the desk. I could feel my breathing getting shallower. More careful. The next entry was shorter than all the others. Just one line. They're closer now. There was no date. No time. Nothing else. I turned the page. The last entry. The writing was barely readable. Shaky. Pressed deep into the paper, as if the pen had been dragged across it without control. They're learning. That was it. No explanation. No follow-up. Just those 2 words. I closed the logbook slowly. The room felt too quiet again. Too still. I sat there for a moment, staring at nothing, trying to make sense of what I had just read. But the more I thought about it, the less it made sense. Or maybe it made too much sense. I stood up again and walked toward the windows. This time I didn't just glance out. I looked carefully, slowly scanning the tree line, the spaces between the trunks, the deeper shadows, anywhere something could stand without being noticed right away. For a long time, there was nothing. Then, just for a moment, I thought I saw something shift. Far out, between 2 trees. A shape, too thin to be a trunk, too still to be an animal. I froze. My eyes locked on that spot, I didn't blink. I didn't move. I just stared, waiting for it to move again. But it didn't. It stayed exactly where it was. Still, quiet, watching. I wasn't sure how long I stood there like that. It could have been seconds. It could have been longer. Eventually, my eyes started to sting. I had to blink. Just once. And when I looked back, the shape was gone. I stepped back from the window slowly. My chest felt tight again. That same quiet pressure. Stronger now. More certain. I turned my head slightly, looking at the other windows, half expecting to see something standing there. Closer. But there was nothing. Just the forest. Unchanged. I told myself it was nothing. A trick of the light. A shadow. My mind reacting to what I had read. That had to be it. It had to be. I moved back to the desk and placed my hand on the logbook again. I didn't open it this time. I just rested my hand there, feeling the rough surface under my fingers. And for a moment, I had a thought I couldn't ignore. What if the person who wrote this didn't leave? What if they were still here? Not in the tower, but somewhere below. Somewhere between the trees. Watching the same way those things were described. Standing still, waiting for someone to look away. I pulled my hand back slowly, stepped away from the desk. The room didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt borrowed, like I was staying in a place that already belonged to something else. I walked toward the radio without thinking, just to check it again, to hear something normal, something human. I turned it on. Static filled the room immediately. Soft, steady, familiar. For a moment, it almost felt comforting, until the pattern shifted, just slightly, and beneath the static, I heard it again. That same slow rhythm. In, pause, out. I didn't turn it off this time. I just stood there listening. And slowly, without meaning to, my eyes drifted back toward the windows, toward the forest, and I found myself wondering how many of them were out there now, and whether they had been there all along, or if they had only started to appear. After I read the words in that book, I tried to ignore it at first. The smoke, I mean. It started sometime after midday, though time didn't feel very clear up there. The light hadn't changed much since morning, just that same pale, steady glow sitting over the trees like it didn't belong to the sky. I was standing near the window, scanning the horizon like I was supposed to. That was the job. Look for smoke, report it, stay alert. Simple. And then I saw it. A thin line rising between the trees. Far out. Barely visible. At first, I felt a strange sense of relief. Finally, something normal. Smoke meant fire. Fire meant purpose. It meant I could do something instead of just standing there with that quiet, creeping feeling in my chest. I leaned forward slightly, focusing on it. It rose slowly, straight up at first, then drifted. But not the way smoke usually does. It didn't spread. It didn't thin out. It held its shape. That was the first thing that felt wrong. I told myself it was just the distance. Maybe the wind wasn't strong enough to move it yet. Maybe I just couldn't see the movement clearly from up here. So I kept watching. Minutes passed. The line of smoke grew thicker, darker, but it still didn't behave the way it should. Instead of breaking apart, it bent, curved, like it was following something, or becoming something. I felt my grip tighten slightly on the edge of the window. My eyes didn't leave it. Slowly, very slowly, the shape began to change. The top part widened, the lower part narrowed, until it almost looked like a figure. Not clear, not solid, but enough that my mind started filling in the rest. A head, shoulders, a body stretching upward from the trees. I blinked, just once, and when I looked again, it was gone. The smoke had thinned out, blending back into the air like nothing had been there at all. I let out a slow breath I didn't realize I was holding. My chest felt tight again. That same quiet pressure. I stepped back from the window. It was nothing. It had to be. Smoke does strange things sometimes. Heat, wind, distance. It can play tricks on your eyes. That's all this was. I turned away, tried to focus on something else. The radio, the logbook, anything but the trees. But after a while, I found myself drifting back to the window again. Just to check, just to be sure. The forest looked the same. Still, empty, no smoke, no movement. I stood there for a long time, waiting. Nothing happened. Eventually, I told myself to stop. This was exactly the kind of thing that logbook had warned about. Seeing things that weren't there. Letting your mind twist shapes into something else. I wasn't going to fall into that. Not this early. So I forced myself to sit down. I opened one of the canned meals, ate slowly, barely tasting it. My thoughts kept drifting back to what I had seen. Or thought I had seen. By the time I finished, the feeling had settled again. That quiet unease. Not as sharp now, but deeper. Like it had roots. I stood up again. Walked to the window. I don't know why. Maybe I was hoping it wouldn't be there again. Maybe I needed to prove to myself that it was nothing. But as soon as I looked out, I saw it. Not in the same place. Closer. Another thin line of smoke, rising from between the trees. This one was clearer, more defined. And again, there was no fire. No glow. No flicker. Just the smoke, rising on its own. I felt my throat go dry. I didn't move. I didn't even blink this time. I just watched. The line twisted slightly, then curved, bending in a way that felt deliberate. Like it wasn't reacting to wind. Like it was choosing its shape. Slowly, it began to form again. That same outline. Head, shoulders, a narrow body stretching upward. But this time, it didn't stop there. The shape leaned, just slightly, toward the tower, toward me. My fingers pressed harder against the wooden frame of the window. I could feel the rough texture under my skin, grounding me, keeping me still. The smoke shifted again. The shape held for a moment longer, then collapsed inward, folding back into itself. Gone, just like before. I stepped back. My heart was beating faster now. Not loud, not pounding, just steady and heavy. I turned away from the window completely this time. Walked to the other side of the room. I didn't want to look again. I didn't want to give it that attention. Because something about it felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain. Not just strange, not just unusual, but aware. I picked up the radio without thinking. Turned it on. Static filled the room again. Soft, familiar. I focused on it. Tried to let it settle my thoughts. But even that didn't feel right anymore. Because underneath the static, that same pattern was there. Faint, but steady. In, pause, out. I turned the volume down. Not off. just low enough that I could pretend it wasn't there. But I still heard it, in the silence between everything else. I sat down slowly on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, trying to make sense of it. Smoke doesn't move like that. It doesn't form shapes. It doesn't lean. And it definitely doesn't appear without a source. Unless it wasn't smoke. The thought came quietly. I didn't want to follow it, but it stayed there, waiting. I looked up again, toward the windows, and without thinking, I stood, walked back, looked out. There were more of them now. Not just one, not just two. Thin lines of gray rising from different points in the forest, all at different distances, all moving, slowly, and as I watched, they began to shift, one by one, bending, stretching, forming, each one taking on that same vague, human-like shape. Not solid, not clear, but enough that my mind couldn't ignore it anymore. They weren't random. They weren't natural. They were repeating, learning. I felt my breath catch slightly. The air in the room felt thinner, harder to pull in. I stepped back again, but my eyes stayed locked on the trees, on the shapes, and then something changed. One of them didn't fade. It didn't collapse back into smoke. It held its shape, longer than the others, and slowly, very slowly, it began to rise higher, above the trees, stretching upward, until it was almost level with the tower. Not close, but not far enough. I couldn't look away. The shape tilted again, just slightly, and even from that distance, I had the clear, undeniable feeling that it was looking at me, not in the way a person looks, not with eyes, but with something else, something that didn't need to see to know. My hands felt cold, my body still. The other shapes below it shifted, faded, returned to thin lines of smoke. But this one stayed, holding its form, watching. For a long time, neither of us moved. Then slowly, it began to thin, the edges breaking apart, the shape dissolving back into nothing, until there was only empty air where it had been. The forest returned to stillness. No smoke, no movement, nothing. I stood there, staring at the space it had filled, my reflection faint in the glass. And for a moment, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. My own outline, pale against the window, standing still, watching, and just for a second, it didn't feel like it was copying me. It felt like I was copying it, like I had been standing there too long, too still, too quiet. I stepped back quickly. The feeling passed, but it left something behind, a thought I couldn't shake, that whatever those shapes were, they weren't just appearing, they were practicing. And the longer I stayed up there, the more I watched them, the closer they were getting to becoming something real. By the time the third night came, I had stopped trying to tell myself it was normal. Whatever I had seen in the trees, whatever had been written in that logbook, it wasn't something I could explain away anymore. The tower didn't feel like a job site. It felt like a place people had passed through and left behind. I hadn't heard from anyone since I arrived. No check-in, no instructions, nothing on the radio except that same low static and that slow, quiet pattern hidden beneath it. I tried calling out once that morning, just to hear a voice that wasn't mine. I picked up the radio, pressed the button, and spoke clearly. "This is Lookout Station. I'm checking in." My voice sounded strange as it left my mouth. Flat. Too even. Like it didn't carry weight. I waited. Static answered me. Then silence. I tried again. Nothing. The second time, I thought I heard something shift in the background of the signal. Not a reply. Just movement. Like something had leaned closer to listen. I didn't try a third time. After that, I kept the radio on. Not for communication. Just so the silence wouldn't feel so complete. But even that became difficult. Because the longer I listened, the more that pattern became clear. In. Pause. Out. Slow. Patient. Always there. By the afternoon, I stopped looking out the windows as often. Not because there was nothing there, but because there was too much. The smoke still appeared now and then. Sometimes faint. Sometimes thick enough to hold shape for longer than it should. And every time it did, I felt that same awareness pressing back at me. Like it knew I was watching. Like it wanted me to keep watching. So I stayed inside. I focused on small things. Counting supplies. Checking the structure of the tower. Anything that felt real. Anything that didn't involve the forest. But even inside, it didn't feel safe anymore. The walls creaked more than they should have. Not with the wind. With something else. Slow shifts. Small movements. Like the tower itself was adjusting, reacting. That evening, I noticed something I hadn't before. At the base of the stairs, from the window facing downward, there were marks. At first, I thought they were just shadows. But when I looked closer, they had shape. Footprints. Faint. Pressed into the dirt around the bottom of the tower. I leaned closer to the glass, trying to see clearly. They weren't scattered. They were gathered, circling, just like the ones around my tent that night. The same pattern, the same quiet repetition. I stepped back slowly, my chest tightening again. I hadn't gone down there, not since I arrived. So those prints weren't mine. That thought stayed with me as the light faded again, or whatever passed for fading in that place. The room grew dim, but not fully dark, just enough to make the corners feel deeper, the windows heavier. I turned on the lamp, sat on the bed, listened. The radio crackled softly beside me, breathing underneath it, always breathing. I didn't try to sleep. I didn't think I could. So I just sat there, waiting. I don't know how much time passed before I heard it. A sound from below. Faint. Almost nothing. But enough. A step. Wood against weight. Slow. Careful. I didn't move. My eyes stayed fixed on the floor. Listening. Another step. Lower on the tower. Not inside. Outside. On the stairs. My breath became shallow. Controlled. The same way it had been in the tent. I knew that sound. I remembered it. The slow rhythm. The deliberate placement. It was the same. It was back. Another step. Closer. The wood creaked softly under the pressure. Not loud, but clear. Something was climbing. I stood up slowly without making a sound. My legs felt heavy, unsteady, but I stayed balanced. Still, the steps continued, one after another. No rush, no hesitation, just steady, like it had all the time it needed. I turned my head slightly toward the door. the only thing between me and the stairs. Between me and whatever was coming up. The handle didn't move. The door didn't shake. But the sound kept rising. Closer, closer, each step placed with care. Like it understood the structure. Like it had learned it. My throat felt dry. I didn't speak. I didn't even swallow. I just listened. The steps reached the final section of the stairs. Just outside. Right below the door. Then they stopped. Silence. Complete. Even the radio seemed to quiet for a moment. I stared at the door. Waiting. My body tense. Ready. But for what, I didn't know. A few seconds passed. Then I heard it. Breathing. Right on the other side. Slow. Measured. In. Pause. Out. Closer than it had ever been before. I could hear the slight shift of air as it moved. Feel it almost. Through the wood. Through the thin barrier that separated us. I stepped back without meaning to. Just one step. My foot barely made a sound. But the breathing paused. Completely. As if it had noticed. My heart started beating faster. Still quiet. Still controlled. But heavier now. The pause stretched longer than it should have. Then the breathing returned. Softer. Slower. Like it was adjusting. Like it was thinking. And then, something touched the door. Not a knock. Not a push. Just pressure. Gentle. Testing. The wood creaked slightly under it. I stared at the spot where the sound came from. My hands cold. My body still. The pressure moved. Slowly sliding along the surface. Tracing the shape. The edges. As if it was learning what stood between us. I wanted to step back again. But I didn't. I couldn't. Because something inside me was telling me. If I moved again, it might try something else. The pressure stopped. The breathing continued. Steady. Controlled. More natural now. Too natural. And then, very softly, I heard it. A sound beneath the breathing. A shift in the air. Like something trying to form. A voice. Not clear. Not complete. Just fragments. Broken pieces of sound. But inside those pieces, I recognized something. Not a word. Not a sentence. Just a tone. A rhythm. Familiar. Too familiar. My chest tightened. Because it sounded like me. Again. Not perfect. Not exact. But close enough. Close enough that I knew where it was coming from. The voice stopped. The breathing remained. For a long time, nothing else happened. No movement. No steps. Just that presence on the other side of the door. Waiting. Listening. I don't know how long I stood there. It could have been minutes. It could have been longer. Time didn't feel real anymore. Eventually, the breathing began to fade. Slowly, each inhale softer than the last. Each exhale longer. Until there was nothing. Just silence again. I didn't move right away. I stayed where I was. Watching the door. Listening. Waiting for it to come back. But it didn't. When I finally stepped forward, it was slow. Careful. My hand reached out toward the handle. Stopped just before touching it. I didn't want to open it. I didn't want to see what was out there. But something else, something quieter, pushed me forward. I needed to know. My fingers closed around the handle. cold metal. Still, I turned it slowly. The latch clicked. Soft. Too loud in that silence. I opened the door just a little. Enough to see the stairs outside. Empty. No movement. No shape. Nothing. I opened it further. Stepped out slightly. Looked down. The stairs stretched below, winding into the darkness. And along each step, there were marks. Footprints. Deep. Clear. Leading all the way up. Stopping right at the door. I stared at them. My chest tight again. Because they weren't random. They weren't scattered. They were placed carefully. One after another. Perfectly spaced. Perfectly shaped. Exactly like mine. I stepped back inside slowly. Closed the door. Locked it. Even though I knew. It wouldn't matter. Because whatever had climbed those stairs hadn't needed to force its way in. It had just needed to learn how. And as I stood there in the quiet, listening to the faint return of the radio's breathing, I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit. It wasn't trying to get inside anymore. It was waiting, because it already knew that sooner or later, I would open the door again. I didn't know them. That was the first thing I told myself when I signed up. The missing kids, I mean. Their faces were everywhere for a few days, on local news, shared online, printed on paper and taped to boards near the highway. 4 teenagers, same school, same weekend trip. They went into the forest and didn't come back. I remember looking at their pictures and feeling something small. Not grief, not fear, just a quiet pull. The kind that makes you stop scrolling and read a little longer than you planned. Then I moved on, until the call for volunteers came. Search teams needed more people. The area was large. The terrain was difficult. They needed anyone willing to walk, to look, to listen. I don't know why I signed up. Maybe I wanted to feel useful. Maybe I thought it would be simple. Walk through the trees, follow instruction, help find a clue, something small, something that would lead to answers. I didn't think about what it would feel like to not find them, or what it would feel like if something else found us first. The meeting point was a clearing near the edge of the forest. There were already people there when I arrived, trucks parked in uneven lines, folding tables set up with maps and supplies, a few uniformed officers moving between groups, speaking in low voices. Everyone looked tired, not physically, just heavy, like they had been thinking about the same thing for too long. I parked my car and stepped out slowly. The air felt cool, even under the daylight. There was a smell of damp earth and pine. The forest stood just ahead. Dense, quiet, watching. I walked toward the group and gave my name to a man with a clipboard. He nodded, wrote something down, then handed me a map. "Stay with your team," he said. "Don't wander off. If you find anything, call it in. Don't touch anything unless you're told." His voice was calm, practiced, like he had said the same thing many times already. I nodded, didn't ask any questions. I joined a small group near the edge of the clearing, 5 of us in total. No one introduced themselves right away. We just stood there looking at the trees, waiting. Eventually, a ranger approached. He looked older than the others, his face lined, his eyes tired in a way that didn't come from lack of sleep. He pointed to the map. "This section here," he said. "You'll start at the marked trail, then move inward. Stay spaced out, but keep each other in sight." He paused for a second, then added quieter, "If it gets too quiet, call out." I frowned slightly at that, but didn't say anything. Too quiet. It already felt quiet, but I assumed he meant normal forest silence, the kind that can make you lose your sense of direction if you're not careful. We started walking a few minutes later. The trail was narrow but clear, worn from use like people passed through it often enough. The ground was soft underfoot, covered in leaves and pine needles. At first, it felt almost normal. The sounds of the group moving together, the occasional crack of a branch, someone clearing their throat. Small human noises. They helped. They kept the space from feeling empty. But as we moved deeper, those sounds began to fade. Not because we stopped making them, but because something else seemed to absorb them. The forest grew thicker, the trees closer together, the light dimmer even though the sun was still up. I kept my eyes moving. Left, right, down at the ground, looking for anything that didn't belong. A footprint, a piece of clothing, a sign that someone had been there. But there was nothing. No marks, no broken branches, no disturbed earth. It didn't feel like a place where 4 people had walked through. It felt untouched. That was the first thing that unsettled me. I glanced at the others. They were spread out just like we had been told, close enough to see, far enough that their movements felt distant. One of them called out a name. Softly. It didn't carry far. Another voice answered, but not with words, just a sound to confirm they were still there. I kept walking, step by step, slow, careful. The map in my hand didn't help much. The lines and markings felt disconnected from what I was seeing. The terrain didn't match. The spacing felt off. I told myself it was just perspective. That maps always feel different when you're inside the place they represent. Still, something about it didn't sit right. After a while, I noticed something else. The air felt still. Not calm. Not peaceful. Just unmoving. There was no wind. No rustling leaves. Even the faint sounds of insects seemed distant. I remembered what the ranger had said. If it gets too quiet, call out. I hesitated. Then I spoke. Hello. My voice felt strange as it left me. Flat, like it didn't travel the way it should. It didn't echo, didn't bounce. It just faded. I waited. One of the others responded, calling out again. But their voice sounded far away. Too far, even though I could still see them. I felt a small shift in my chest. That quiet pressure again. The kind that doesn't panic you, but doesn't leave either. We kept moving. Deeper. The trail thinned until it wasn't really a trail anymore, just a direction we were following. The trees grew closer still, their trunks darker, the spaces between them harder to see. I started noticing shapes. Not clearly, just suggestions. Places where the light didn't fall quite right, where the shadows felt a little too solid. I blinked a few times trying to clear it, telling myself it was nothing, just the way the light moved through the branches. That's all. Then someone called out again. One of the names, louder this time. There was a pause, and for a second, I thought I heard something answer. Not a voice, not clearly, just a sound. Faint, broken, like it came from deeper in the trees. I turned toward it. So did the others. We all stood still, listening, but it didn't come again. The forest returned to that same quiet. Heavy, watching. One of the volunteers shook their head. Probably just an animal, they said. No one argued. We started moving again. But now the pace was slower, more cautious. I kept glancing over my shoulder. Not because I heard anything, but because it felt like I should. Like something might be there if I didn't. After a while, I realized something else. We weren't as close together anymore. The spacing had changed, widened. The others looked farther away than they should have. Even though none of us had said anything. None of us had stopped. I opened my mouth to call out again. But I hesitated. Because I wasn't sure. I wanted to hear what might answer. Instead, I just kept walking. Step by step. The forest stretching around me. Endless. Unfamiliar. And slowly, without anyone saying it out loud, it began to feel less like we were searching for something, and more like we had stepped into a place that had already been waiting for us. We didn't find them. Not at first. What we found was where they had been. It happened slowly. No one announced it. No one called out like they had found something important. It was more like we all felt it at the same time. That quiet shift in the air, the sense that something had changed. The trees opened, just enough to form a small clearing. Not large, just enough space to see the ground clearly. And in the center of it was their camp. I stopped at the edge, my body going still without me telling it to. The others gathered nearby, but no one stepped forward right away. We just looked. There were 4 tents, set up in a loose circle. All of them closed. Not collapsed, not torn, not disturbed. Just there. A fire pit sat in the middle, surrounded by stones, blackened from use. A faint layer of ash resting inside, untouched. A few logs lay nearby, half burned, like the fire had gone out on its own. There were backpacks too. 3 of them stacked near one of the tents. One lying on its side, slightly apart from the others. Nothing looked damaged. Nothing looked rushed. It didn't feel like a place people had left in a hurry. It felt like a place they had stepped away from, just for a moment, and never came back. I took a step forward, then another. The ground felt soft under my boots, but there were no clear footprints. That was the first thing that didn't make sense. 4 teenagers, camping here for at least a night. There should have been signs, movement, marks in the dirt, but the ground looked smooth, almost untouched. I crouched slightly, looking closer. There were faint impressions, barely there, like something had been there once and then slowly erased. I stood up again. My chest felt tight. That same quiet pressure I had felt deeper in the forest. Stronger now. One of the others walked toward the fire pit. Another moved toward the tents. No one spoke. It didn't feel right to. The silence in that clearing was different. Heavier, like it was holding something. I moved toward the nearest tent. My hand reached out slowly, touching the fabric. It was cool. Not cold. Just neutral. Like it hadn't been warmed by the sun or cooled by the night. I unzipped it carefully. The sound felt too loud. Too sharp. I paused halfway, listening. Nothing. So I opened it the rest of the way. Inside, everything was in place. A sleeping bag, slightly wrinkled. A small pillow. A jacket folded near the corner. A phone lying beside it. I picked up the phone. The screen lit up immediately. Battery almost full. No luck. My fingers hovered over it for a second. Then I set it back down. Something about it felt wrong. Not the phone itself. Just the way it was there. Ready. Waiting. Like it had been left for someone to find. I zipped the tent closed and stepped back. One of the others called out quietly. Over here. We all turned toward the voice. They were standing near the cooler. The lid was open. Inside there were drinks, Food. Ice that hadn't fully melted. It looked fresh. Too fresh. Like it had only been left there a few hours ago. But that wasn't possible. They had been missing for days. I felt a chill run through me. Not from the air. From the thought. I looked around the clearing again. Everything looked recent. Alive. As if the people who belonged to it had just stepped away into the trees and could come back at any moment. But they didn't. They weren't here. One of the volunteers tried calling out again. Louder this time, saying their names, one by one. The sound felt wrong as it left their mouth. Flat, like it didn't travel far. It faded quickly, swallowed by the trees. We waited. No answer. Not even an echo. Just that same heavy silence. I moved toward the edge of the clearing, drawn by something I couldn't explain. The trees stood close together there. Darker. The space between them felt deeper than it should have. I looked down at the ground. That's when I saw the footprints. Clear this time. Deeper. Pressed into the dirt. Leading away from the camp. All in the same direction. Vorcets. Side by side. I followed them with my eyes. They moved in a straight line. Into the forest. Toward the darker part. I took a step closer. My heart beating a little faster now. The others noticed and moved behind me. We stood there together. Looking. The footprints continued for a few steps. Then, they stopped. Not faded. Not spread out. Just ended. Mid-step. As if the people making them had been there 1 second. And gone the next. I felt something shift inside me. A quiet realization I didn't want to accept. People don't disappear like that. Not without something happening. But there was no sign of a struggle. No marks. No broken branches. Nothing. Just those prints. Ending. I stepped back slowly. My eyes still fixed on the ground. Trying to make sense of it. But there was nothing to make sense of. One of the volunteers whispered something. I didn't catch the words. It didn't matter. Because none of us understood what we were seeing. We moved back into the clearing. Closer together now. Without saying it. Without deciding. Just instinct. I glanced at the tents again. At the fire pit. At the backpacks. Everything still there. Unchanged. Waiting. And for a moment, I had the strange feeling that if we stayed too long, we would become part of it. Another group. Another set of things left behind. I looked at the others. Their faces tense. Quiet. Thinking the same thing, even if they weren't saying it. We should have left right then. Gone back to the trail. Reported what we found. But we didn't. Because something else had settled in. Something stronger than logic. Curiosity. Or maybe something pulling us deeper. I turned back toward the trees. Toward where the footprints ended. And that's when I noticed something else. A sound. Faint. So faint I almost missed it. Like a voice. Broken. Distant. I held up my hand slightly. The others went still. We listened. It came again. Soft. Barely there. Like someone trying to speak from far away. From deeper in the forest. Calling out. I couldn't make out the words. But I didn't need to. Because I knew what it was supposed to be. One of them. One of the missing. Asking for help. I felt my chest tighten. My body leaning forward without thinking. The others looked at each other, uncertain, but listening. The voice came again, a little clearer this time. Still broken, still wrong, but closer. And that's when something in my mind shifted. Because the sound didn't feel natural. It didn't feel like a real voice. It felt like something copying one, trying to match the shape of it, the tone, the rhythm, but not getting it right. I took a slow step back, my breath shallow, controlled. "Do you hear that?" someone whispered. I nodded, but I didn't answer, because I wasn't sure what to say. The voice came again, calling, waiting, from the same direction, from where the footprints had stopped. And as we stood there, caught between the empty camp behind us and that quiet, broken sound ahead, I realized something I couldn't ignore. Whatever had taken them hadn't left. It was still there, somewhere in the trees. And now, it knew we were here too. I couldn't take my eyes off the footprints. They were fresh, impossible to miss. Deep impressions pressed into the soft mud near the edge of the clearing. 4 sets, side by side, almost like they had been walking together, talking quietly, moving with purpose. Each step perfectly aligned, each stride consistent. The kind of neat pattern only people who are careful or too scared to run leave behind. At first it was a relief, something real, something tangible. Finally, a clue. A sign that they had been here, that they were somewhere, even if somewhere was just deeper in the forest. I stepped closer, careful not to disturb the tracks. My boots sank slightly into the mud. I exhaled slowly, noticing the earthy smell, the wet tang of pine needles. The forest was quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet that presses against your ears like it's listening, waiting for you to make a sound so it can swallow it whole. I tried to make sense of the prints. One set had a small tear in the sole pattern, maybe a sneaker, maybe a teenager's shoe. Another had a muddy smudge as if the person had tripped slightly. Nothing alarming, nothing yet that suggested a struggle. I motioned for the others to come closer. They approached slowly, hesitant, sensing the same wrongness that pressed against my chest. We formed a small circle around the tracks. "They just stopped," someone whispered. I frowned. "What do you mean?" "They end here," they said, pointing a trembling finger at the mud. I followed the line of the prints with my eyes. The last steps were there, crisp, clear, perfect. And then nothing. No broken branches, no sunken spots in the dirt, nothing disturbed beyond that point. Just the soft, unbroken undergrowth of the forest. It was as if the earth had swallowed them mid-stride. I stepped closer to the last print, crouching down. I pressed my hand lightly to the mud. The imprint was solid, unmistakable, but the ground beyond, untouched. The next step that should have been there was. I swallowed hard. "Maybe they veered off to the side," I suggested, though my voice was hollow even to my own ears. I scanned the undergrowth, but it was uniform. No broken branches, no trampled ferns, not even a mark to suggest someone had jumped, crawled, or fallen. Nothing, just the tracks and then nothing. The others were quiet now, listening, waiting. I could feel their tension mirrored in my own chest. That strange pressure that had been building since we first entered the clearing, like the forest itself was pressing against us, watching, holding its breath. I tried to make sense of it logically. Maybe the mud was only soft for a few steps, then hardened. Maybe the prints had eroded or someone had backtracked carefully, covering their trail. All plausible, except it didn't feel plausible. Not here, not now. The forest around us seemed to shift subtly, though I couldn't say whether it was real or imagined. Shadows lengthened in ways that didn't match the sun. The air thickened, holding a faint, sour smell I couldn't place. And somewhere nearby, the soft trickle of water, normal at first, had stopped. Silent. Dead. I exhaled slowly, tried to force my mind back to reason. Footprints end sometimes. Maybe they'd gone into a hollow, a ditch, or an old root system that swallowed the marks. I motioned for someone to go ahead. Not far, just a few steps to check. No one moved. Not a single volunteer stepped forward. Their hesitation was contagious. I could feel it in my knees. My stomach twisted. That same low, impossible tension that makes you want to run, but your feet refuse to obey. I looked around. The clearing felt smaller now, the trees closer, their trunks blackened by shadow, their bark rough, uneven, alive in a way that wasn't comforting. I stepped forward carefully, my eyes on the ground. Nothing. The mud was gone. Only soft leaves and moss, untouched, perfect. It made no sense. And then I heard it. A sound, soft, not a voice, not words, just a faint shuffle, a brush of movement. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. My body went rigid, the others stiffened too. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. No one answered. It came again, a step or two deeper in the forest, something moving through leaves and twigs, but careful, quiet, almost deliberate. We didn't move, didn't call out, didn't even breathe too loudly. I strained my eyes, trying to pierce the dim light. The shadows among the trees shifted slightly just at the edge of my vision. Something small, something crouched, or tall, maybe hunched over. I couldn't tell. The prints, the sound, the stillness of the clearing, it all collided in my mind, and a cold, sinking thought settled deep in my chest. The teenagers hadn't just wandered off. They hadn't left tracks. They hadn't been taken in a normal way. Something else had been there. Something patient, something that could move without leaving a trace. I took another step. My boot made a soft squelch against wet leaves. The sound felt impossibly loud. The forest seemed to recoil. Then the footprints appeared again. Not far ahead, faint, almost blending into the ground, but there. 4 sets staggered slightly, continuing deeper into the forest. We followed, step by slow step. No one spoke. I didn't want to. Every sound seemed amplified, every shadow threatening to move closer. The footprints led us into a denser part of the forest. Light struggled through the canopy. The air was thick and damp. I could feel my pulse in my ears. And then they stopped again. Abruptly, mid-stride, perfectly aligned, just ended. I crouched down again. My fingers traced the edge of the last print, solid, real, but nothing beyond, not even a hint of direction. I straightened, my eyes scanning the undergrowth, heart hammering, mind racing. And then I noticed it. A faint indentation in the moss, a subtle, deliberate depression, like someone had knelt or crouched there, almost human, but wrong. I stepped back, the hair on my arms rose. Something had been here. Something had watched. Something had been moving alongside them, learning their steps, their rhythm, their pace. I looked at the volunteers, their faces pale, silent. I could see it in their eyes, the same realization creeping over them that had consumed me. This forest wasn't just hiding the missing teenagers. It was studying them, waiting, and now it was studying us too. I swallowed, took a deep breath, tried to calm my shaking hands. The footprints had stopped, but whatever was in these trees hadn't. It was still out there, and I knew deep down that we were being drawn further into it. Step by step, word by word, breath by breath, the forest had begun to claim us too. Night fell like a heavy blanket over the forest. The light disappeared in a sudden swallow, leaving shadows that seemed to pulse and shift. We set up a small perimeter near the last footprints, trying to convince ourselves that a little circle of flashlights and lanterns could keep the darkness at bay. But the forest didn't care about boundaries. I sat on a fallen log, knees drawn to my chest, staring into the blackness between the trees. The other volunteers moved quietly, checking the undergrowth, whispering to each other in low tones. No one dared raise their voice. Every sound seemed amplified, every snap of a twig a potential warning. Then it began. At first I thought it was one of us joking, a prank to break the tension, a faint, broken call. "Hey, can anyone hear me?" I froze. It wasn't from any of our group. The voice came from deeper in the trees, soft, far away, but unmistakably human. My stomach turned over. That sounds like them," I whispered. One of the volunteers, Mark, swung his flashlight toward the direction of the voice. "It's impossible," he said. His voice trembled, betraying the calm he tried to project. "They can't be here. It's too far, too dark." Another voice, quieter this time, echoed, "Help, please." I recognized it instantly. Sarah's voice, one of the missing teenagers. But there was something wrong, something off. The cadence, the tone, it was close to her voice but not exactly right. Like someone or something was trying to copy it, studying it, learning it. I couldn't move at first. My legs were heavy, almost numb. My chest tightened with fear, but it wasn't the normal kind. Not adrenaline, something else. Cold, insidious, like the forest itself had wrapped a hand around my ribs. The voices came again, one by one, each call distinct, each pleading. "Jason, help me. Please don't leave me. Over here, I'm scared." I swallowed hard, my throat dry, my mouth clinging to tasteless air. The words pulled at me. They weren't just calls for help, they were invitations, hooks dragging me deeper into the darkness. I caught the eyes of the others, all of them pale, silent, frozen in the same mixture of disbelief and fear. No one wanted to speak, to respond, to call back, but I could feel it in all of us, the irresistible urge to answer, to step into the shadows and find them. We should have left. We should have called it off. But none of us did. The forest seemed to stretch endlessly around us. Trees loomed like silent sentinels, their trunks blackened by the night. Every branch swayed, even without wind. Every rustle of leaves sounded deliberate, as if the forest itself was listening, learning, waiting. Then the voices changed. They began to overlap, layered, 4 or 5 of them calling at once, each repeating the same few words over and over. "Please help me. I'm scared. Over here." I couldn't tell which was which. My mind struggled to separate one voice from another, each echoing off unseen trunks and thick underbrush, creating a chorus that pressed against my brain. Something shifted in the darkness. I caught movement fleeting just at the edge of the lantern light. Branches bent unnaturally, shadows detached from the trees sliding along the ground, not fully formed, not solid, almost liquid, watching, waiting. I took a cautious step forward. My flashlight beam cut across the forest floor. Nothing. Then another step, and another. My boots sank into wet leaves and moss, making soft, wet squelches that sounded deafening in the quiet. The calls continued, pleading, coaxing, soft and intimate. Sarah, Jason, Emily, Ryan, the missing teens. Names I knew, voices I remembered from brief encounters in town. And then I realized they weren't just calling. They were mimicking. It wasn't them. It was the forest, or whatever had taken them, learning their speech patterns, their intonations, their fears, trying to make us come closer, to trust it, to step where we didn't belong. I stopped moving. My flashlight shook slightly in my grip. The others had noticed too. We exchanged glances, silent and wide-eyed. We all understood without saying a word. The moment we stepped forward, we would enter its territory. A sudden rustle behind us made me spin. Nothing, only the darkness pressing closer. I turned my gaze back toward the forest. The calls were louder now, not desperate, deliberate, knowing. "Over here, I'm scared. Please help me." I felt a cold shiver run from my scalp down to my spine. The air thickened, humid and heavy, smelling faintly of decay and wet earth. My pulse hammered in my ears. I could hear my own breathing, short, shallow, ragged. Mark whispered something, almost inaudible. We shouldn't be here. We need to leave, now." But even as he said it, the voices continued, pulling, coaxing, each word a tiny knife twisting in my mind. I tried to step backward. My foot sank slightly into the moss. The movement made the voices pause, just for a heartbeat. And then they shifted. The tone changed. A subtle mocking cadence, not a call for help anymore, a taunt. "Don't go, come closer." I froze. My stomach dropped. My legs refused to cooperate. My mind screamed, warning me not to listen, not to move forward, but curiosity, primal, terrifying curiosity, tugged at me like a leash. The volunteers clung to the lanterns, shaking. None of us dared speak. Our whispers would have been drowned by the sound of the forest itself, the low, insistent hum that had begun, like the trees themselves were whispering secrets. I noticed a movement to my left. A dark shape slipped silently behind a thick tree trunk, then reappeared hunched, stretching, almost human but wrong. Long arms, legs bent unnaturally, head tilted in ways that shouldn't bend. I blinked. It vanished. The voices continued, layer upon layer, pleading, coaxing, mocking. "Help me. Over here. Don't leave me." Each one felt personal, like the forest knew my name, knew my fears, knew what would make me move. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I realized it had been waiting for us, waiting for someone to follow the tracks, to find the camp, to listen. I stepped backward slowly, careful not to make a sound. My feet sank into leaves. My heart raced. My fingers trembled around the handle of the flashlight. A sharp whisper pierced the air, close, almost at my ear. "You're here." I spun, no one, only the forest. Something in the darkness shifted again, closer, watching, waiting. The voices continued, now soft, near my feet, far away, overlapping, impossible to separate. I couldn't tell which ones were real, which ones were imitations. I couldn't trust my senses. I felt a pressure in my chest, low and insistent. Fear, yes, but deeper. A sense that the forest didn't want us here. That whatever had taken the teenagers was teaching itself to call, to mimic, to lure. And now we were part of its lesson. We were not alone. And I knew, in that instant, that the forest had been listening since the very moment we stepped into the clearing. Everything we saw, everything we thought we understood, it had already been anticipated, calculated, waiting. I looked at the volunteers, each face pale, eyes wide, frozen in the same mixture of disbelief and terror. None of us spoke. None of us moved. We were all caught in that same unyielding gravity, drawn by the voices, trapped by the dark. The forest exhaled, or maybe it held its breath. I didn't know which. I only knew that we were inside it now. Inside something older, smarter, and colder than any human mind could comprehend. The calls echoed once more, pleading, coaxing. 4 names, voices familiar but wrong. And for the first time, I realized we might never leave. Step by step, breath by breath, the forest had already begun to fold us into its rhythm. And as the first faint glimmer of moonlight struggled through the canopy, I understood the truth. We were not alone. We never had been. And the forest was patient. Waiting for the moment, we forgot how to listen. I hadn't planned on staying late that day. The park was quiet, the kind of quiet that wraps itself around your ears and presses in on your thoughts. Most of the visitors had left by mid-afternoon, leaving me alone in the ranger station, checking equipment and filing paperwork that no one would read. It was routine, repetitive, comforting in its own way. That's when I noticed the door at the far end of the storage room. I had walked past it countless times but never really looked. Today, for some reason, I did. Dust covered the edges, thick and gray, like it hadn't been opened in decades. The padlock was rusted, useless. Curiosity outweighed caution. Inside, the room smelled of decay and old pine. Wooden shelves sagged under the weight of forgotten supplies. Maps curled at the edges, broken flashlights, faded notebooks, and then among the debris I found it. A small plastic cassette tape, yellowed with age. It had no label, nothing to indicate its contents. I picked it up carefully, turning it over in my hands. The tape felt brittle. I half expected it to crumble. My fingers traced the edges and a shiver ran down my spine, though I couldn't say why. There was something deliberate about its placement, as if someone had wanted it to be found but not quite ready for anyone to know. The station's old tape player sat on a high shelf. I hadn't used it in years, but it still looked intact. I blew off the dust and inserted the cassette. The tape clicked into place and I pressed play. Static hissed first, a low, abrasive sound that made me flinch. Then a voice. It was faint, barely audible over the hum of the tape. Soft, almost a whisper. "Hello, can anyone hear me?" I froze. The voice was human, female, but something about it made my skin crawl. It was tense, nervous, fragile. The kind of voice you hear in a moment of absolute isolation, when the person speaking knows that nobody is there to respond. I leaned closer. "Hello," I whispered back, though I knew the tape wouldn't hear me. The voice continued. "I don't know how long I've been here. I think someone's following me. The trees, they move when I'm not looking. I hear them, but when I turn, nothing is there." I swallowed hard. Goosebumps rose along my arms. It was just a recording, just sound pressed into magnetic tape. Yet the way the words were spoken made it feel alive, immediate, present. There was a pause, filled only by the faint hiss of static. Then the voice spoke again, lower this time, almost a whisper for fear of being overheard. "I shouldn't be here, I know that now, but it's too late. I hear them even in my sleep. They are in the walls and the floorboards, moving closer. I can't see their faces, but I know they watch. I know they wait." I pressed stop. My hands were shaking slightly. The station was silent again, except for the occasional creak of the building settling. I tried to tell myself it was just a tape someone had recorded years ago. Maybe a ranger, a camper, or even a prankster. That explanation seemed rational. But my stomach twisted anyway, the same cold pit of unease I'd felt when I first saw the door. Curiosity gnawed at me. I pressed play again. The voice returned. "If anyone finds this, don't come looking for me. The forest, it's not empty. It's listening. It waits until you're alone, until you hear the wrong thing, and then it's too late." I paused the tape. My mind raced. Who was this? And more importantly, was it still here? Could it even be a recording of someone who'd been out there, or was it something else entirely? The tape continued on its own. A low, rhythmic sound underlay the words. Breathing. Not the recorded, flat kind you hear on old tapes, but real, ragged breaths. Sometimes fast, sometimes slow. A pulse. A rhythm. I couldn't place it exactly, but it matched the cadence of fear. The voice softened, almost pleading now. "I thought I could hide. I thought I could survive. But the trees, they know. They remember every step you take. They remember you. And now I am part of it. You will hear me. You will hear it too, and you will not understand until." Static swallowed the words. The tape clicked, hissed, and paused. I pressed stop, sat back in the chair, and let out a shaky breath. My hands still trembled. I didn't want to hear more. I wanted to leave, to put the tape back and forget it. But the same compulsion that had made me open the storage door now gripped me again. I had to know. I rewound the tape, this time listening carefully, trying to catch every nuance. There were pauses, soft taps against wood, faint rustling, almost imperceptible. My imagination filled in the gaps, but I couldn't convince myself it wasn't real. I could hear movement, subtle, deliberate. Footsteps. Or maybe just the echo of fear captured in magnetic particles decades ago. I realized I'd been holding my breath. My chest tightened. The forest outside the station felt wrong. The wind had died down. No birds sang. No crickets chirped. Just the low hum of the tape player and my own heartbeat. Then came the words I hadn't noticed the first time. Soft, almost inaudible. Between the voice's lines, a whisper, a secondary presence. Don't leave me." It was different from the main voice, not recorded in the same cadence. It seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. My skin prickled. My hands shook more violently now. I wanted to eject the tape, to leave, but I couldn't. My curiosity was stronger than my fear, and the tape continued, relentless, dragging me deeper. And if you follow, you will see what I have seen. You will hear what I have heard, and you will understand the forest. It is not empty. It is alive. It is patient, and it remembers. The words trailed off. The tape hissed and then went silent. I sat there in the dim light of the station, gripping the tape in my hands. Cold sweat ran down my back. My mind churned, trying to rationalize it all. Perhaps it was an old ranger recording a survival log, paranoid, alone. Perhaps it was someone imagining monsters where none existed. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just a recording. The forest outside was too quiet, too aware. And something about the way the voice spoke, the pleading, the urgency, the quiet despair, felt immediate, present, like it hadn't been waiting for decades to be heard. It had been waiting for me. I put the tape back on the shelf, hesitated, then turned to leave the room. The station felt smaller now, heavier, like the walls themselves were pressing in. The air smelled faintly of damp earth and old pine, mingled with something I couldn't name, something old, watching, patient. As I walked back toward the main room, I glanced at the storage door one last time. Dust had settled again, undisturbed, silent, waiting. I knew I would return to that tape. I didn't know why. I only knew that curiosity, once sparked, rarely dies, and some doors, once opened, never truly close. I couldn't stop thinking about the tape. Even after I left the station that evening, the voice haunted me. It was faint in my memory at first, like a half-forgotten dream. Then it grew sharper, pressing against the edges of my thoughts. I found myself glancing at the storage door, half expecting it to move, half expecting it to call to me. I told myself I wouldn't go back. I had work to do. Routine patrols, inventory checks, nothing mysterious. And yet, the next day, I was there again, my fingers tracing the edge of the tape before I inserted it into the player. The hiss of static was louder this time, more insistent. It filled the room, sharp against the soft hum of the fluorescent lights. And then the voice returned, closer somehow, as if it had been waiting for me. "Please just let me in," the whisper began, so soft I thought I might have imagined it. But it repeated, insistent. "Please, I can't stay out here." I froze. My heart thudded in my chest. The words weren't part of the tape's original voice, I realized. They were layered underneath, almost hidden in the static. A second presence, faint but undeniable. My skin prickled as if tiny insects were crawling along my arms. I leaned closer to the player, trying to separate the sounds. Footsteps, soft and deliberate, shuffled through the quiet background. Not the kind made by the tape itself, but something alive. Something moving in rhythm with the whispers. "Please let me inside," the voice repeated, desperate now. "It's waiting. I can't hide anymore." I swallowed, my throat dry. My hands trembled. Rational thought tried to surface. Perhaps it was just tape interference, overlapping recordings from a previous ranger. But the sound was too precise, too human, too real. I pressed pause. Silence. For a moment, I could hear nothing but my own breathing and the faint creak of the station. But then, as if the tape hadn't ended, a soft scratching at the floorboards beneath my feet made me jump. I told myself it was nothing, just the building settling. Mice. Maybe a branch tapping the wall outside. Anything normal, anything ordinary. But the whispers returned, this time layered with another sound. A low, rhythmic tapping, like fingers drumming nervously against wood. "Please help me. Let me in." I leaned back, heart hammering. The tape hummed in my ears, soft static masking the voice at times, then revealing it in unnerving clarity. I could hear breaths now, ragged, panicked, and not part of the tape. A sensation prickled at the back of my neck, the same cold fear I felt the first day I found it. I wanted to eject the tape, to run, but something held me there. The whispers were intimate, pleading like someone reaching through time and space to speak directly to me. "I can't stay out here, it won't stop." A shadow flickered across the corner of my vision. I spun around. Nothing. The station was empty. The shelves were still, the light steady. The air smelled of dust and old pine, with a faint tang of something I couldn't name, something ancient. I pressed play again. The voice continued, low and trembling, almost a whisper in my own mind rather than the speaker's. "They are in the trees, watching, waiting. I thought I could escape, but there is no escape." Then came a new sound. Soft footsteps, deliberate, circling the room, overlapping with the static. I didn't move, afraid that movement would draw attention, afraid that acknowledging it would make it real. "Please let me inside," the voice repeated, broken, desperate, trailing off into a murmur I could barely understand. Something about it sounded like pleading or warning. I sank into the chair, gripping the tape player as if holding it might anchor me. My mind raced. If this was just a recording, why did it feel alive? Why did the whispers seem to anticipate my own hesitation, my own thoughts? And then I heard it clear as day. A soft tap at the door. I froze. My breath caught. My hand hovered over the player, unsure if I should stop the tape or let it continue. The tap came again, slow, deliberate, matching the rhythm of the whispers. I told myself it was someone playing a prank. Maybe a coworker, a local camper, testing my nerves. Rational explanations flickered in my mind like small flares in the darkness. But the station was deep in the forest, miles from any trail, closed for the season. The last person who could have entered would have been hours ago, if not days. The tape continued. The voice's tone changed, more frantic now, almost pleading. "Don't open the door. Whatever you do, don't open it. It's not human, it's not like us. You will see, you will hear, and you will understand." Static rose, thick, hissing, almost suffocating. Then a soft, wet scraping sound like claws against wood, layered beneath the whispers. My stomach churned. I couldn't tell if the sounds were part of the tape or coming from the room itself. The line between recording and reality blurred. I pressed stop, my hands shaking. Silence. Heavy, oppressive silence. My pulse raced. I wanted to leave, to step outside into the fresh air, but my curiosity, stubborn, relentless, kept me rooted. I pressed play again. The whispers returned, pleading, rhythmic, hypnotic. "Please help me, it wants me. It won't stop." I realized I was leaning forward, eyes wide, listening, tracing every nuance, every irregularity. The static seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting in sync with the voice. I imagined shadows shifting just beyond the edge of my vision, watching me, studying me, knowing I was alone. The tape trailed into incoherent murmurs, layered voices overlapping, some crying, some whispering, some muttering words I couldn't understand. Each layer added to the unease, the sense that the forest outside the station itself had become a conduit for something else, something patient, something alive. I rewound the tape, listening again. Each time I caught new subtleties, a soft gasp, a footstep, a whisper just beneath the audible range. The sense of presence grew stronger, tangible, pressing against me through the speakers. Hours passed, though I couldn't tell. The sun dipped low outside the windows, and shadows stretched across the room, mirroring the static-filled dance of the tape. My reflection in the glass looked haggard, haunted, as if the tape had reached into me and left traces. Finally, I ejected it, holding it in both hands, shaking. I whispered to the empty room, "Who are you?" No answer came, of course, only the creaking of the building, settling into itself, patient, unyielding. I left the station for the night, the tape in my bag pressed close. I knew I wouldn't sleep. I knew I would return. There was something inside that recording, something alive, something that had waited for me specifically. And though I feared what I might find, I couldn't stop thinking about it, couldn't stop hearing the whispers in the static, echoing in my mind, soft, insistent, unrelenting. I realized, as I drove away from the station into the gathering darkness of the forest, that this was only the beginning. The voices weren't done with me, and perhaps I was not done with them. I thought the tape had ended. I thought ejecting it, leaving the station, even sleeping for a few hours would be enough to escape the voice, the whispers, the presence that had burrowed into the edges of my mind. I was wrong. When I returned the next morning, sunlight spilling weakly through the dusty windows, I found the tape still humming softly in the bag. I hadn't pressed play. I hadn't touched it. And yet, it played. Static hissed at first, low, almost apologetic. Then came the faintest murmur, barely distinguishable over the hiss. At first I thought it was in my mind, my imagination, haunted by the events of the previous night, but the sound grew clearer, forming words. Soft, careful, deliberate, whispers that didn't belong to the station. I'm here, I'm still here. My hands shook as I held the tape player, and I realized something impossible. It was recording, not playing. The voices I heard were coming from somewhere outside the station, somewhere just beyond the edge of the forest. I pressed stop, but it continued. The static shifted, forming a layer beneath which the forest spoke. Leaves rustled unnaturally, branches cracked in patterns like deliberate signals. Footsteps, perhaps, but too precise, too measured. There was a rhythm, a cadence, almost human, but not entirely. I leaned out the window, straining my eyes along the tree line. Sunlight glittered off the wet leaves, but nothing moved, nothing that I could see. Yet the tape's whispers grew, layering themselves with the sounds outside, merging seamlessly. The forest was alive, and the tape had become its ear, its voice, its message. I see you watching, the whisper came again, soft and trembling, almost shy. But I knew it wasn't shy, it was patient, waiting, studying. My mind tried to rationalize, to anchor itself in the mundane. Perhaps the tape had a flaw, an echo of the forest recorded from earlier patrols. Perhaps my sleep-deprived brain had created patterns from nothing. But then I heard it, the soft footfall of someone or something, walking just beyond the tree line. Slow, deliberate, circling the station. The hair on my neck prickled. My pulse raced, but I forced myself to stay calm, to observe. I pressed play again. The tape recorded everything, every rustle, every crack, every breath. The whispers grew clearer, urgent, but faintly, almost as if from far away. They are watching, they remember. I glanced around the station, empty and silent. I was alone, utterly alone, yet the sounds were unmistakable. The tape had become a conduit, a bridge between the forest and this tiny, dusty room. The air smelled of pine and wet earth, mingled with something else, something metallic, something faintly sweet. I stepped outside, tape player clutched in my hands, listening. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig seemed magnified, focused through the static of the tape. The whispers continued, and now they weren't just begging, they were instructing. Follow, follow the sound. They hide in plain sight. I froze. The rational part of me screamed to stay put, to return to the station, to shut the tape off and never look back. But curiosity, stubborn and relentless, kept me moving forward. I stepped carefully into the forest, letting the tape guide me, its whispers threading through the trees, weaving a path that I could feel more than see. The ground was wet, soft, and uneven. Branches reached for me like fingers, snagging at my sleeves and hair. The tape's static crackled, and with each step the voice changed, more insistent, closer, almost breathing into my ear. They see you, they feel you, they are learning. My chest tightened. I wanted to scream, to throw the tape and run, but every fiber of my being was drawn forward, hypnotized by the whispering, the suggestion that something important waited ahead. Something that only I could hear, only I could respond to. Hours seemed to pass, though I couldn't measure time. The sunlight dimmed to a dull gray, filtered through the thick canopy. Shadows shifted unnaturally, forming shapes that mimicked human figures, then dissolved as I focused on them. The tape recorded it all. Every shift in the shadows, every hint of movement that my eyes could barely catch. I reached a small clearing. The tape's static swelled, almost singing now, and I realized with a shiver that I was hearing the forest itself whisper through the tape. 1,000 tiny voices layered into one, instructing, pleading, warning. They never left, they never sleep, the tape knows. A sudden snap behind me made me spin. Nothing. Only the trees unmoving, watching. I pressed my ear closer to the tape player. The recording had captured something impossible. My own movements, my own breathing, my own footsteps, but warped, delayed, as if the tape was playing me back to me. I stumbled back, breath ragged. I wanted to stop, to run, but the whispers urged me onward. I followed the static deeper into the forest, guided by the unnatural soundscape. Eventually, I came to a shallow pit. Inside, the earth was churned, covered in footprints, small, large, human, and not quite human. The tape crackled with excitement, or perhaps it was just my imagination, but I swore the whispers had grown louder, urgent. They are learning. They know you are here. Leave now or stay forever. I fell to my knees, overwhelmed, shaking. The tape continued to record, every sound amplified, every whisper distinct. The forest itself had become alive, aware, watching, judging, learning. And then I realized something even more terrifying. The tape hadn't just captured the forest. It had captured me. My fears, my thoughts, the rising panic in my chest. It recorded it all and played it back, amplified with layers of whispers that no human could have fabricated. I scrambled back toward the station, the tape still recording, still whispering, still alive. Every rustle of leaves behind me, every snap of a twig, every movement in the shadows was captured, transformed, whispered back through the static in ways that made my blood run cold. By the time I reached the station, night had fallen. The tape hummed in my hands, insistent, almost satisfied. I pressed stop, but the whispers lingered in my mind, in my ears, a soft, inescapable echo. I knew then that it didn't matter whether the tape was on or off. It had found a way to record everything, everywhere, through me, through the forest, through the silence itself. And if I returned tomorrow or the day after, it would continue. It would continue recording, waiting, whispering, learning. I sat there in the darkened station, gripping the tape, listening to the soft static hum, and realized the worst part. I wasn't ready to stop. I couldn't stop, and the forest knew it. Somewhere beyond the tree line, I could almost hear it laughing. I had told myself I would never return. The cabin had been nothing but charred wood and memories, blackened beams jutting from the earth like broken teeth. Years had passed since the fire, and I'd convinced myself that whatever haunted that place had been buried in ash along with it. But standing at the edge of the clearing, I felt an old, familiar pull, an unreasoning tug in my chest that had drawn me here before I even realized it. The forest had changed. Trees that were saplings then had grown thick and tall, their leaves forming a dense canopy that filtered the sunlight into pale, trembling shards. The scent of smoke was gone, or so I thought, but there was still something lingering in the air, something faint, sour, that made my stomach twist. And then I saw it. The cabin. Not the ruin I expected, not the hollow skeleton of blackened timber, but a cabin whole and intact. Wood dark with age, shingles in perfect rows, smoke curling lazily from the chimney as though someone or something had been tending it. I blinked. I pinched myself. The world didn't shift. It was real. The burned cabin that had vanished into memory was standing again, right where it had always been. My boots crunched on the forest floor as I approached, every step hesitant. The air seemed heavier here, thick with the scent of damp pine and something older, something acrid. The door was closed, plain, unremarkable. No sign of life, yet every instinct in me screamed that someone or something was inside. I reached for the handle. My fingers trembled. A part of me wanted to run, to turn back and forget I'd ever seen it. But another part, the part that had come back after all these years, pressed forward. Curiosity, stubborn and raw, pushed me to touch the wood. The door swung open with a soft creak, revealing a room bathed in late afternoon light. Dust motes floated lazily in the beams, but the cabin felt alive. Too alive. Chairs were arranged neatly around the table. A kettle sat on the stove, blackened from use. The smell of old wood and faint smoke lingered in the air. Everything was intact, untouched by fire, untouched by time. I stepped inside slowly, letting my eyes adjust. The floorboards groaned under my weight, a subtle rhythm that seemed almost deliberate. I ran my hand along the table, feeling the grooves in the wood, the faint heat still radiating from the stove. Nothing should have been here. Nothing should have existed beyond the ashes I remembered. And yet here it was. I moved deeper into the cabin, each step a battle against the unease curling in my chest. On the wall hung photographs, yellowed with age, but their faces were sharp, clear, unnerving. My own face stared back at me from one of them, younger, eyes wide, expression frozen in fear I didn't remember feeling. Another photograph showed the cabin before the fire, smiling faces around it. Faces I didn't recognize, but that seemed impossibly familiar. A whisper of movement caught my attention. I turned sharply. Nothing. Just the cabin, quiet and patient as though it had been waiting for me all these years. I could feel it watching. I could feel the wood itself breathing, waiting for me to notice the small details that had changed subtly, impossibly. I approached the fireplace, expecting cold ashes, but the hearth was pristine, the embers glowing faintly as though the fire had never died. I reached out instinctively, hand hovering over the warm coals. A faint scent of smoke rose, fresh smoke, not the stale tang of a fire long past. My mind reeled. This defied everything I knew, everything I remembered. The cabin had burned. I had been there, seen it consumed. Yet here it stood, perfect, alive, welcoming me back. And then I heard it. A soft tapping, almost imperceptible, coming from the far corner of the room. My pulse jumped. I froze. It stopped. The silence returned, thick and suffocating. I told myself it was a branch against the window, a trick of the wind, but my instincts screamed otherwise. The cabin was not empty. I moved toward the sound, each step measured, careful. My eyes scanned the corners, the shadows, searching for movement, for signs of life. And then I saw it. A small wooden box, carved and aged, sitting in the corner where I didn't remember placing it. I didn't place it. I had never seen it before. I knelt, fingers brushing over the intricate carvings. They were familiar yet strange, patterns I didn't recognize consciously, but that made something inside me tighten with recognition. I opened the lid. Inside, nothing but ash. And yet the ash shifted, forming shapes that reminded me of faces. Smiling, grimacing, watching me. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I closed the box quickly, heart hammering. The cabin felt alive around me, a silent observer holding its breath. I wanted to leave. I wanted to run, to escape whatever was happening here, but my legs wouldn't move. I was rooted to the spot as though the cabin itself had claimed me. The windows rattled. A soft, deliberate creak echoed through the floorboards. I swiveled, scanning the room. Shadows stretched unnaturally, bending around the edges of the furniture, flickering in ways that defied the fading sunlight. The cabin was changing, breathing, shaping itself around me, and I was an intruder in its memory. I remembered the fire then, the way the flames had consumed the place, how the smoke had filled my lungs, how the smell of burnt wood had lingered long after the embers died. And yet, here I was, standing in a cabin that should not exist, in a forest that had grown over the remains. A whisper curled through the air, soft, almost amused. "You came back." I spun, searching, but there was no one, no visible presence. Just the cabin, still, perfect, waiting. The box in the corner quivered slightly, as though something inside it breathed. My skin prickled with the cold realization that I was not alone, not in the way I understood, not in the way that made sense. I backed toward the door, eyes darting over every surface, every shadow. The warmth of the hearth seemed to pulse with a rhythm matching my own heartbeat. I reached the door, hand on the handle, and paused. A feeling of inevitability pressed down on me. The cabin had returned for a reason. I did not know why, but I knew it had been waiting for me. I stepped outside finally, the door closing softly behind me. The forest greeted me with familiar sounds, the wind through the trees, the birds, the distant rustle of small animals. Yet the clearing felt different, altered, as though the cabin's presence had changed the very space around it. I turned back once. The cabin stood there, quiet, perfect, and impossible. Smoke drifted lazily from the chimney. No one was there, and yet I knew it was alive. And I knew I would return. I didn't sleep that night. Even when I closed my eyes in my car at the edge of the clearing, images of the cabin burned themselves into my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest itself had shifted around the place, shaping the clearing to preserve it, to protect it. By the time the first light of dawn filtered through the trees, I was standing at the threshold again. The air was cool, damp with morning mist, and every leaf, every branch seemed sharper, more deliberate. I hesitated only briefly before stepping inside. The door closed silently behind me. At first it looked as it had yesterday, warm light spilling through the windows, chairs arranged neatly, the hearth untouched. But then I noticed something that made my breath catch. The items inside were not just intact, they were untouched by time. The kettle on the stove had water droplets on it as if someone had just filled it. A cup of coffee sat on the table, steam rising gently. The photographs on the walls hadn't yellowed further, hadn't even shifted their frames. Even the floorboards were unscuffed, smooth and polished as though no one had walked on them for decades, or perhaps as if no one had walked at all. I moved slowly, careful not to disturb anything. Every step felt heavier than the last, weighted with the impossible certainty that I was intruding on something not meant to be seen. The cabin was frozen in a state I could not understand, as if it had been paused in memory itself, suspended somewhere between past and present. I walked to the fireplace again. The coals glowed faintly, just enough to illuminate the room in an amber haze. I reached toward them instinctively, as though hoping to feel the warmth as proof that I was still tethered to reality. The heat brushed my fingers, real yet somehow alien. A soft click echoed from somewhere behind me. I froze. The sound was faint, almost polite, like the cabin was breathing around me. Turning slowly, I scanned every corner. The wooden box from before sat exactly where I had left it. I hesitated, then approached and opened it again. The ashen side had shifted slightly, forming new shapes. Faces, or something like faces, stared back at me. Their expressions were impossible to read, some pleading, some mocking, all watching. My heart began to pound, the rhythm loud in the quiet room. I closed the box, suddenly aware of the oppressive stillness pressing against my chest. I walked further, touching objects that had no reason to remain. A stack of books on a shelf, titles I had never seen but felt unnervingly familiar. A coat hanging by the door, lined and warm as if it had been worn yesterday. Even the floorboards under my feet had a softness to them, as though the cabin itself was alive, aware of my presence. A mirror on the wall caught my reflection. I blinked. The face staring back at me was mine, but older, drawn tighter around the eyes, a shadow lingering just beneath the cheekbones. And yet there was something else. Behind my reflection, a faint shape moved, slow, deliberate, almost human, but distorted, wrong. I turned quickly. The room was empty. My breath came fast. I told myself it was a trick of the light, a reflection playing games with my mind. But I knew it was not. I explored every room. Each was perfect, frozen in a moment I could not name. Objects that should have decayed, rusted, or crumbled were pristine. Even the smell, an odd mixture of fresh pine, smoke, and something metallic, was constant, unchanging. Nothing had shifted. Nothing had decayed. Time, it seemed, had no hold here. In the bedroom, the bed was made with sheets so crisp they gleamed in the light. I ran my fingers over the fabric. It was soft, warm, as if someone had just left it. A journal sat on the nightstand. I opened it. The pages were blank, except for a single line at the top of each. I remember you. A shiver ran down my spine. My name was never written here, never spoken aloud, and yet these words felt directed at me, shaped to my presence, to my memory. I dropped the journal back onto the stand, my hands trembling. The room seemed to sigh around me, the air thickening, almost pulsing. I moved toward the window. The forest outside was quiet, unnaturally still. Sunlight filtered in, glinting off leaves, highlighting dust motes that floated like tiny stars. But something was off. Shadows shifted in ways that didn't match the trees. A branch bent slightly, almost imperceptibly, as though testing whether I was watching. Returning to the main room, I noticed the table again. The cup of coffee had changed slightly. It wasn't just the steam. The liquid inside had formed a shape. A face, a symbol. My mind recoiled, refusing to name it. And yet I knew I had not moved it, had not poured it. The cabin was shaping itself, reacting, waiting. I thought of the fire, of the ashes, of the memories that had tried to bury this place in smoke. None of it mattered here. Inside the cabin, nothing had changed. Nothing could change. The walls themselves held history like a living thing, memories embedded in the wood, in the air, in the dust. And they were aware of me, recording me, marking me, shaping me into the story it wanted. A sound made me jump. A soft tap, rhythmic, deliberate, from somewhere above. I swallowed, climbing the stairs slowly, each step groaning under my weight. The second floor was even more frozen, more perfect. A child's room, untouched by fire, still furnished with small toys, a bed neatly made, books on the shelf with pages fanned as if recently read. Nothing decayed. Nothing moved except for a faint vibration underfoot, subtle like the heartbeat of the house. In the corner, a rocking chair swayed gently, though no one sat in it. I approached, hand hovering above the wood. The motion was slow, hypnotic, and for a moment I felt dizzy, unsteady, as though the cabin was breathing me in. I had to step back, my instincts screaming. I moved to the window in the child's room. The forest outside seemed deeper, darker, and yet unnervingly close. Branches pressed against the glass, though no wind moved them. Shadows pooled under the trees, shifting, bending in ways that defied reason. The cabin and the forest were no longer separate. The lines between them had blurred. Descending the stairs, I felt a weight in my chest. Every object, every surface seemed aware of me, watching, nodding my presence. I could not explain it, and I did not want to try. Logic had no place here. The cabin existed on rules I could not comprehend. I had stepped into a memory, into a place where time had frozen, yet was still alive, breathing, waiting. I reached the main room again. The box in the corner quivered slightly, the ash inside swirling into shapes I could not name. The faces stared at me, not pleading or mocking now, but curious, patient, waiting. I understood suddenly that the cabin had not been waiting for me yesterday. It had been waiting for years, decades, perhaps lifetimes, and I had only just arrived. The thought made my stomach twist. I had entered a house that remembered me before I remembered it. That had prepared itself, preserved itself for my return. Every object, every shadow, every whisper of air was part of a system I could not comprehend. A living memory, anchored in wood, in smoke, in the faint, unrelenting heartbeat of the cabin itself. I left the cabin then, stepping back into the forest clearing. I looked at it one last time. It stood unchanged, as if I had never entered at all. And yet I knew it had changed me. My reflection in the car window as I sat inside was sharper, older, aware. The cabin had left its mark. I could feel it in my chest, in the hollow warmth of my bones. I drove away slowly, the trees pressing in around the road. And all the while, I could not shake the feeling that the cabin was not finished with me. That its memory, its awareness, was reaching out, shaping the forest, waiting for the moment I would return again. Because inside, nothing had changed, and that was the most terrifying part of all. I thought leaving would be simple. I had walked through the forest countless times, following the narrow path that should have led me back to the main road, to my car, to anything resembling normal life. But with every step, the forest shifted. Every clearing seemed the same, every tree unfamiliar and yet disturbingly familiar. I tried to keep track of landmarks, the broken stump, the bend in the stream, the fallen log, but they all dissolved under the gray morning mist. It was as if the forest itself had rewritten the paths, folding space back on itself, guiding me, steering me. And then I saw it. The cabin. At first I thought I was imagining it. The smoke rising from the chimney, thin, almost ethereal, shouldn't have been there. The forest behind it should have stretched endlessly, but the trees clustered as if protecting it. I stopped, my stomach twisting, heart hammering. I had walked for hours, and yet here it stood as though waiting. I tried a different path. I veered left at a fork I had not noticed before, hoping it would lead me somewhere new. Sunlight filtered through the leaves in streaks, but the light only led me deeper into the same pattern until finally I emerged again. The cabin, its windows glinting, silent, watching. I stumbled toward it, my mind spinning. Was I lost, or was this deliberate? The forest pressed in around me, the canopy forming shapes in the light, shifting shadows that almost felt like eyes. I tried to call out, but my voice faltered, absorbed by the trees. The air was thick, heavy with damp leaves and the faint smell of smoke, and somehow it felt alive. I reached the porch, my hands trembling as I grasped the railing. The wood was smooth, polished, unchanged by years or weather. Inside, the cabin awaited exactly as I had left it. The kettle, the cup of coffee, the rocking chair swaying slowly, as if welcoming me back. I sat on the steps, pressing my forehead to my knees. Logic had no hold here. Hours or days, I could not tell, of walking, wandering, trying to escape, and yet the cabin had returned me to this place, this impossible loop. I wanted to scream, but fear and exhaustion left me mute. The forest hummed around me, subtle, constant, almost impatient. I tried again. I followed what I thought was the main trail, marking trees with scratches and tying strips of cloth to branches. But the marks faded as if never made. The strips fluttered briefly, then disappeared, leaving the forest untouched. Every path led me back to the cabin. I could no longer distinguish left from right, forward from backward. The forest had folded itself into a circle, a maze with a center I could not escape. The sky changed. Clouds rolled in, blotting the sun, dimming the day into an eerie twilight. Shadows stretched unnaturally, bending at impossible angles. I walked faster then slower, as if the forest was guiding me to learn patience, or perhaps testing my endurance. I began to notice subtle changes. The cabin seemed larger when I approached from the north, smaller from the east. The porch steps were higher than I remembered, the doorknob warmer, as though the house itself had anticipated my arrival. At night, the loop became more sinister. The darkness in the forest deepened, swallowing everything beyond a few feet of visibility. Sounds of the forest, leaves rustling, branches snapping, took on rhythm, almost like whispers just beyond comprehension. I imagined voices calling my name, the faintest hint of someone behind me, moving in tandem with my steps. I tried leaving again, ignoring the paths, heading straight through the trees, brushing aside undergrowth with my hands. The forest resisted. Vines seemed to twist back into place after I pushed them aside. Roots rose from the soil to trip me, forcing me to stumble, forcing me to return to the same clearing. And there it was, the cabin, staring at me, smoke curling from the chimney as if it had never gone anywhere. I began to understand. This was not a forest. This was a mechanism, a living thing designed to trap, to test, to hold me. And I had been chosen, or perhaps I had stumbled here by accident, though the thought of coincidence felt laughable now. Every time I tried to leave, the forest adjusted subtly, seamlessly, folding paths back to the cabin. Sleep became impossible. I tried sitting, resting against trees, closing my eyes for even a few minutes, but the loop was relentless. Even dreams offered no relief. In my sleep, I walked the same paths, hearing the same distant footsteps, seeing the same twisted shadows. And always the cabin waited. I began to pay attention to details, subtle shifts I had missed before. The ash from the fireplace swirled in patterns that repeated each time I returned. The rocking chair tilted at slightly different angles, almost responsive to me. The cup on the table would move, always repositioned as if someone, or something, was watching, learning, interacting. I spoke aloud, desperate, hopping to break the silence. Why me? Why am I here? My voice echoed oddly, stretched and warped by the forest. No answer came, just a quiet rustle of leaves and a distant, almost imperceptible creak, the rocking chair, swaying in time with my heartbeat. I considered leaving markers, sticks, stones, broken branches, but each attempt was erased, neutralized. The forest was patient and infinitely cunning. It wanted me to learn its rhythm, to understand that escape was not simple, not a matter of walking fast enough or memorizing paths. It demanded awareness, patience, surrender. By the third day, or what I could only guess was the third day, I accepted the loop. I stopped struggling. I walked slowly, deliberately, noting the subtle differences in the cabin each time I returned. The kettle, the cup, the chair, the photographs, they were alive in some incomprehensible way. I was a participant in their rhythm now, a part of the forest's memory. And then I saw it. A figure, faint, almost transparent, standing at the edge of the clearing. I blinked and it moved, following the same path I had taken minutes before. I could not tell if it was human or a shadow shaped like one. Its presence was deliberate, patient, watching me, mirroring my movements, echoing me in a way that made my skin crawl. I stumbled back toward the cabin, heart hammering, and it did not move faster, did not chase. It simply waited, mirrored, reminded me that leaving was impossible. I stopped, breathing heavily, leaning against the porch railing. The figure vanished into the trees, and for a moment the clearing seemed empty. But the knowledge lingered. I was never truly alone. Not in the cabin, not in the forest, not in the loop that refused to end. I touched the doorknob and stepped inside. Everything was exactly as I had left it. The cabin remembered me, recorded me, anticipated my return. Even as I sat in the rocking chair, feeling the gentle sway, I understood. I could wander the forest for hours, days, lifetimes, and always return here. Time, paths, direction, they no longer applied. I was trapped in the rhythm of the cabin, part of its memory, and it was part of mine. Outside, the forest waited, patient and eternal. And inside, the cabin waited, unchanged, perfect, alive, recording every thought, every fear, every heartbeat. I do not know how long I can endure this. I do not know if escape is possible. Every path leads back, every choice folds into the same rhythm. And I am learning, slowly, unwillingly, to walk the loop. The cabin watches, the forest waits, and I keep returning. I had been driving for hours, the tires crunching over gravel roads that disappeared into stretches of dark forest on either side. The map was clear enough, and my destination seemed simple enough. A small town at the edge of the woods, where a friend had promised I could camp for the night before heading further north. When I pulled into the gas station just outside town, I noticed the way the locals looked at me. Not suspicious, exactly, but wary. A woman filling her car glanced up from the pump, eyes narrowing, lips pressed together as if she were holding back something important. "Heading into the woods, are you?" the cashier asked when I stepped inside for a bottle of water. His voice was calm, casual, but there was an edge to it, a subtle tension in the way his eyes lingered on me. "Yeah," I said, leaning against the counter. "I'll be hiking a bit before I make camp." He shook his head slowly. "You sure about that? Folks don't usually go too far in there. Voices, they answer you." I laughed, a short, dry sound. "Voices, what do you mean?" He shrugged, his hands resting on the counter. "Some things you don't hear unless you're in the woods when the wind's right. People talk about hearing their names, questions answered, even when no one's there. Old stories, but you should be careful." I nodded, smiling politely. It was exactly the kind of small-town superstition I had expected. I've always liked to dismiss warnings like that. They were the sort of story people told to make themselves feel safe in a forest that held nothing but trees. Still, his words lingered in the back of my mind as I stepped back into the sunlight. The road into the forest was narrow, lined with tall pines that seemed to bend slightly inward, shading the gravel path in a green gloom. I parked the car at the trailhead and checked my pack one last time. Water, flashlight, extra layers. My boots crunched over dead leaves as I stepped onto the trail, and immediately the quiet pressed in around me. At first it was the usual forest silence, birdsong distant, a wind brushing through the treetops, but soon it became something else. A faint hum, almost like a whisper carried on the air. I paused and listened, blinking against the shafts of sunlight. "Hello," I called softly. My voice seemed swallowed, fading before it could bounce back. Then I heard it, my name carried softly, almost too low to notice at first. Jason. I froze, scanning the trees, my pulse quickening. The path ahead looked empty, untouched. I took a step forward, then another. The whisper came again, clearer this time, but still impossibly gentle. "Jason, why are you here?" I swallowed hard, trying to rationalize. Could it be the wind? Some trick of the forest? The words had the shape of a voice, but no figure stood anywhere I could see. My stomach twisted. I'd been alone for hours, and the forest suddenly felt immense, pressing from all sides. I tried moving faster, my boots slipping on loose leaves. The whisper followed. Just behind the edge of my hearing, repeating my name, asking questions I couldn't answer. It wasn't mocking exactly, but there was an odd intent behind it, as if the forest itself were learning about me, testing me. By the time I reached a small clearing, I had begun to notice patterns in the shadows, subtle shapes that didn't belong. A branch angled strangely, forming the shape of a hand. A patch of moss resembled a face. I forced my gaze to the ground, trying to calm myself. But the whispers grew louder, more insistent, and always my name came first. Soft, patient, impossible to ignore. I stopped, pressed my back against a tree, and closed my eyes. I could feel it then, the forest holding me, not with force, but with an almost conscious awareness. Every rustle, every snap of a twig seemed deliberate. It was watching, listening, speaking in the only way it could. I tried to laugh again weakly and said aloud, "It's just me walking." The voice answered immediately, "Yes, just you, but you're not alone." I jolted, heart thumping in my chest. My rational mind raced. I could not see anyone, could not hear anything other than the leaves shifting, and yet it was there. An entity shaped from the forest itself, whispering through the gaps between trees. The sun began to dip behind the tall pines, and the shadows lengthened, twisting into shapes I could not ignore. I forced myself to keep walking, step by step, telling myself the path would lead out eventually. But the whisper followed, bending the trees in subtle ways, forming words just beyond comprehension. It mimicked my breathing, matching my pace, almost coaxing me forward. I came to a fork in the trail and stopped. Both paths were overgrown, but one led deeper into the forest, darker under the thick canopy. The whisper was insistent, and I realized it wanted me to choose, guiding me through the maze. A shiver ran down my spine. The locals' warning wasn't superstition. This forest, whatever it was, answered. Not with voices of people, but with a presence that knew what to say, what to ask, and how to make me reveal myself. I chose the left path, hopping to find the main trail soon. Leaves crunched underfoot. The whisper was quieter now, almost contemplative. My mind spun with a combination of fear and fascination. The forest was alive, and I was inside it. I could feel it in the air, in the subtle shifts in temperature, in the rhythm of the wind. Hours or maybe minutes passed. The light shifted, and the forest seemed to breathe with me. Every time I called out my own name in disbelief, it answered back, almost amused, almost patient. "Jason, why do you run?" I realized I could not run. I could not outpace it. I could only walk, and every step forward was recorded in the forest's memory. I wanted to leave, to escape, but every turn brought the same feeling. Eyes upon me, thoughts brushing against mine, whispers in the wind asking questions I did not wish to answer. Finally, the trail opened into a small clearing, a faint campsite visible in the distance. I saw a fire pit, cold, surrounded by logs and abandoned gear. The air was heavy here, too quiet, almost reverent. The whisper had fallen silent, leaving only the faint hum of the forest. I realized then that I was no longer alone, not really. Something had entered my mind, measured my fear, counted my steps, and learned my habits. And it would not let me leave, not yet, not entirely. The locals' warnings had been simple words, easily ignored. But the forest listened. And sometimes it answers. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. My name echoed once more, barely audible. Jason. I swallowed, feeling the weight of the trees pressing around me. I did not know what waited deeper inside, and I did not know if I wanted to. But the pull of the forest was undeniable. Every step forward seemed necessary, and every glance over my shoulder reminded me. I was already inside something far larger than myself, something patient, something that waited to respond. I gripped my pack straps and continued walking. The whispers faded into the distance, or perhaps they simply waited for the right moment to return. And I knew deep down that this forest was not simply trees and not simply shadows. It was a mind, a patient observer, and I had stumbled inside its gaze. The sun dipped lower and shadows merged into darkness. My steps slowed, my breathing deepened, and I listened. The wind moved differently now. Every sound seemed significant, and somewhere beyond the trees, the forest whispered again. Jason, welcome. The forest was quieter than I expected, almost unnervingly so. After the sun dipped behind the trees, a soft shadow fell over the trail, stretching long and dark. I kept my pack tight on my shoulders, telling myself that the whispers from earlier were just nerves, that my imagination was bending the sounds of wind and leaves into voices. But I could still feel it, something in the air that wasn't quite wind, something listening. I stopped for a moment and leaned against a pine, trying to steady my breathing. The shadows flickered with movement as the last light slipped away. That's when I heard it, my own voice. Jason. I froze. It was me unmistakably calling my own name, but I hadn't said anything. My lips hadn't moved. I swallowed hard and whispered aloud, "Who's there?" Jason, the voice came again, soft and calm. It echoed, yes, but strangely distorted. Not quite like an echo, not quite like my own voice. It was almost a reply shaped with intent, as if someone, or something, had listened, learned, and then spoken through me. I felt my chest tighten. My rational mind tried to chase explanations. Maybe another hiker. Maybe the wind caught my voice somehow. But no, the forest was empty. The path behind me was empty. There wasn't another human for miles. I took a cautious step forward, and the voice repeated. But this time it said something I definitely hadn't spoken. You shouldn't have come here. I spun, heart hammering. My flashlight flicked across the trees, the undergrowth, the trunks lined like silent sentinels. Nothing. But the words hung in the air, sharper now, heavier. Cold seeped into my fingers through the gloves I wore. I tried to speak, tried to call back, but the forest swallowed my voice. The wind moved suddenly, brushing past my neck, carrying a rustle that sounded suspiciously like laughter. I swallowed, reminding myself. No one was here, just me. Only me. I started walking again, faster this time, each step hesitant but urgent. My own voice came back, repeating, reshaping itself. You will not leave. I stopped dead. My head snapped around, scanning the darkness between trees. A branch snapped in the distance, soft but deliberate. I froze, frozen to the ground with disbelief. My voice, my own voice, had told me that I would not leave. I wanted to tell myself I was imagining things, but even as I moved forward, I could feel the forest pressing around me, alive, aware, bending my steps, listening to my breathing. I forced myself to continue, counting silently in my head to keep my mind focused. 1, 2, 3. The path seemed to stretch endlessly, twisting in ways that made no sense. Every turn looked familiar, like I had stepped there before, though I knew I hadn't. The forest wasn't just big, it was infinite, folding back on itself, and the voice was patient, waiting. Then it spoke again, more urgently this time, and in words I never thought I could hear. Jason, you are not alone in your thoughts. I froze again, staring at the ground. My pulse pounded. My hands shook. I couldn't tell if it was a warning or a lure. I wanted to run, but my legs felt heavy, pressed down by something I couldn't name. The forest seemed to breathe around me, in rhythm with my own heartbeat, measuring, calculating. I stopped, leaning against a tree, trying to calm myself. The whisper came once more, quieter now, as if testing me. Do you remember your last choice? I frowned, confusion twisting in my stomach. What choice? Nothing like this had ever happened before. I tried to ignore it, but even as I shook my head, the forest seemed to hum, the shadows shifting. My mind raced, images flashing from earlier steps, the fork in the trail, the strange clearing, the campsite I'd passed before. Each memory seemed altered, like it had been watched and rewritten. I realized then, whatever I was hearing, whatever was speaking, it wasn't just mimicking my voice. It was mimicking my thoughts, shaping them, pulling them into words I hadn't spoken aloud. The forest wasn't just alive. It was conscious, and it was patient. A rustle to my left drew my gaze, slow, careful. A low sigh, almost a human breath, drifted across the leaves. My own voice again echoed softly. You should turn back. I froze and my own mouth moved without my permission. I can't, I whispered, but the words sounded strange, heavy. Like someone else's weight had pressed into them. The darkness thickened as I moved forward, and the whispers came again. Layered now, multiple voices echoing together, yet all familiar, all mine. You cannot leave, not yet, Jason. I staggered, pressing my hands over my ears. My mind raced in loops, spinning, trying to distinguish what I had thought from what the forest was planting in my consciousness. But the harder I tried, the louder it became. My name, questions, commands, all in my voice, all coming from somewhere between the trees. A sudden clearing opened up ahead, moonlight spilling over the mossy ground. And there, for the first time, I saw something barely. A shadow, almost human, moved just beyond the edge of the light. I froze, heart in my throat, but the forest's voice spoke again, soft, gentle, almost coaxing. Do you see? You are being heard. I swallowed hard. My instincts screamed to flee, but I couldn't. Not yet. My legs moved almost automatically, guided by some unseen force, drawn toward the clearing where the shadow lingered, indistinct, almost like a memory half-formed. The voice repeated, slower now, deliberate. Every word you think, every step you take is known. I crouched down instinctively, pressing myself into a thick patch of moss, trying to disappear. My flashlight shook in my grip. The forest didn't answer this time. It waited. Patience draped over the clearing like a thick fog. I whispered aloud, almost in a panic, "Who are you?" And my own voice answered, my own words, spoken in a tone I hadn't used. I am what waits. A cold shiver ran down my spine. My breath came in short gasps, and I felt my grip on reality slipping. The forest wasn't just listening. It was shaping me, my mind, my voice, and it had been doing so all along. I realized that the locals hadn't been exaggerating. They hadn't been joking. I had ignored the warnings. I had thought I was brave or clever or immune to old superstitions. But now I understood. The forest had replied. And the reply was me, but not me. Something had used my voice to reach me, to make me know, to make me understand that I was already inside something that could see and hear everything I thought. I stumbled forward blindly, tripping over roots and stones, guided by the whispered repetitions of my own voice, echoing through the trees in ways I could no longer trust. The shadow in the clearing remained just at the edge of sight, patient still. And I realized finally that leaving was no longer a matter of direction. It was a matter of permission. Every step I took, every thought I had was being answered. The forest had learned my voice, and the first reply had been only the beginning. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to move, to survive. The forest hummed around me, a living thing, patient and aware. My voice, echoing back at me, spoke truths I could not comprehend. I realized then, I had entered a place where my thoughts were no longer private, and in this forest every answer carried weight. The whisper followed me into the night, quiet now, almost contemplative. And as I moved deeper, I understood something terrible. I was not just lost, I was known, and what was known could answer. "You are not alone," the voice said again, soft, patient, deliberate. And this time it felt like more than words. It felt like presence, watching, waiting. The forest had changed since yesterday. The shadows seemed thicker, the trees closer together, as if the woods had folded in on themselves while I slept, or perhaps while I wandered blindly trying to escape. I wasn't sure anymore. Time had become slippery. Minutes stretched, hours condensed. My own footsteps sounded strange against the damp earth, hollow, like someone else was walking behind me, just out of sight. At first the voices were faint, distant whispers carried on the wind, but by morning they were louder, clearer, almost conversational. "Jason," one of them said, slow and deliberate. I froze. The words weren't just echoes anymore. They weren't random phrases or distorted sounds. They were deliberate, constructed sentences, full sentences. I tried to reply aloud, my voice shaking, "Who's there?" The answer came almost immediately, smooth and familiar. "We've been waiting for you. You are curious, aren't you?" I swallowed hard, my stomach twisting. I knew somehow that the voice was learning. It knew what questions to ask, what words would make me respond. I wanted to convince myself I was imagining it, that I was just fatigued, hungry, stressed. But even then, my mind whispered back the words before I spoke them, as if I had no control. "Curious," I muttered, voice trembling. I'm just trying to understand." "Yes," it said, patient, almost pleased. "Understand what? The forest, yourself, or us?" My pulse quickened. The words seemed to come from everywhere at once. The trees, the leaves, the mossy floor beneath my boots. And though I couldn't see anyone, I felt eyes on me. Always watching, calculating, familiar. I took another step, hesitant. The branches brushed against my shoulders. The wind stirred in unnatural patterns, carrying a soft, low murmur of conversation, my own voice answering questions I hadn't spoken aloud. "Who are you?" I asked, though the words felt hollow as they left my lips. The response was immediate. "We are what watches, what waits. We learn from those who wander. You are interesting." The forest hummed with it then, almost like a subtle vibration under my feet, a pulse that synchronized with my heartbeat. I realized suddenly that I was speaking to the forest, or maybe the forest was speaking to me. It knew my name, my thoughts, my fears, and it was feeding back sentences, learning from my responses, shaping the conversation to make me confess more than I intended. I shivered and tried to turn away, tried to keep moving, but each step seemed to bring me back into the center of a web I couldn't see. And then the sentences started to get personal. "You are afraid of being alone," it said softly, almost gently. I froze. My hands gripped my pack straps. How could it know that? I had never told anyone, not my friends, not my family, not even myself sometimes. "Yes," I whispered, though my voice shook. I don't like being alone." "Alone," the voice repeated, slower this time, savoring the word. "But you are not alone, Jason. Not here, not now, not ever." I wanted to run, but my legs felt heavier than they should, like gravity had shifted around me. The forest itself seemed to hold me, bending the path, folding the ground, keeping me inside its perimeter. And yet the voices weren't cruel. Not exactly. They were curious, patient, probing, learning about me. My fears, my regrets, the thoughts I tried to bury. "Tell us," it said softly, "what do you fear most?" I couldn't stop myself. I was speaking now, almost automatically, answering with thoughts I hadn't intended to voice. I'm afraid I'll be forgotten, that no one will remember me if I vanish." There was a long pause. The forest was quiet except for the distant rustle of leaves. Then it responded, almost contemplatively. "Forgotten, but you are remembered here, Jason. Every word you speak, every thought, every breath, it is absorbed, kept. And so you are never truly alone." The logic made no sense, but a part of me understood it anyway. The forest wasn't just listening. It was storing me piece by piece, like a puzzle being assembled without my consent. And in that understanding, I felt a creeping dread. I wanted to resist, to turn back, but my curiosity, foolish curiosity, pushed me forward. The voices pressed closer, forming sentences now that felt almost natural, almost human. "You remember the creek yesterday?" one asked. "The water was cold, the sound rushing over stones. You paused there. Why?" I closed my eyes. I had paused, yes. Paused because I wanted to hear the water, because I was nervous, because I was trying to remember what silence sounded like. I had thought I was alone, but somehow the forest had noticed. The forest had remembered. "Because it was quiet," I said, "and I needed a moment." "Yes," it said softly, approvingly. "Quiet moments, we understand. You are not hiding from us, Jason. We are part of you now." I shivered, and the forest seemed to hum, a low vibration under my feet that pulsed with my own heartbeat. The words, though gentle, pressed on my mind like the wind through the trees. My own voice was coming back to me, repeating the questions and my confessions, shaping them into something else, something I couldn't entirely identify. I tried to take another step, and a new sentence arrived, this time faster, almost impatient. "Why do you carry so much weight, Jason? The pack, the memories, the fears speak to us." I wanted to resist, but I felt compelled. My own voice, my words, were no longer entirely mine. They spilled out, raw and honest. I carry them because I cannot leave them behind, because they are part of me, and I am not strong enough to discard them. The forest was silent for a moment, and I felt my pulse hammering in my ears. Then it spoke again. "Then you will carry them here, with us, and we will remember even if others forget. You belong to the forest now, Jason, and the forest belongs to you." I stumbled, breathless, and the words lingered. I didn't understand what had just happened, but a part of me, the rational part, the terrified part, knew I had crossed a line. I was no longer simply wandering through the forest. I was conversing with it, learning, feeding it, and being fed. My thoughts were no longer private. My voice was no longer my own. I tried to step back, to put distance between myself and the clearing ahead, but my legs refused. And the voices began again, faster now, forming full sentences without pause. "What do you remember of the cabin, the burned cabin you passed? What did you feel when you saw it standing again? Speak, Jason." And I had to answer. I had no choice. I felt, I don't know, confused, terrified, like something impossible was happening. "Yes, impossible. That is why you are here, because you notice, because you feel, because you respond. We are learning from you, and you, in turn, learn from us." I wanted to flee, but I knew I couldn't. Not yet. The forest had engaged me. It had caught my attention. My words, my fears, my hesitations, they were being collected, catalogued, understood. Every reply shaped the next question. Every answer gave it more to mimic, more to respond to. "You are safe here, Jason, but you are watched, always. And we learn every day, every night from your choices. Speak or be silent, and we will know either way." I shivered and moved forward, half running, half stumbling through the undergrowth. And the voices followed, patient, whispering, asking, learning. "What do you hope for? What do you fear? What do you carry that you cannot let go?" And I answered, even as terror gripped me. My own voice spoke the truth, but it wasn't mine alone anymore. And in that moment, I understood, finally, that being lost in conversation wasn't about wandering the forest. It was about being known, completely, utterly, by something patient and eternal that had learned how to speak my voice. I wasn't alone, not really, not anymore. The forest had become a mirror of my thoughts, my words, my fears. And the mirror, it was talking back. I couldn't stop moving. My legs carried me forward through the thick undergrowth, over tangled roots and slick moss, and still the forest seemed endless. Every time I thought I recognized a clearing, a familiar tree, I would turn and find only more shadows, more shapes that pressed in on all sides. And then it spoke my name. Jason. The sound was soft, almost a whisper, and yet it carried through the trees like a physical touch. Not shouted, not forced, just known. I froze. My blood ran cold, my ears ringing with that single syllable. I hadn't said it aloud. I hadn't spoken at all since the voices started forming sentences, since the forest began shaping the words I thought. And yet it knew. Jason. Again, closer this time. Not from a single direction, but from everywhere at once. From the rustle of leaves above, the groan of the trunks around me, the faint hum beneath my boots. It wasn't an echo. It wasn't a mimic. It was recognition. I swallowed hard. Who's there? My voice sounded strange to me, like it belonged to someone else entirely. You know who we are, it said. The voice was patient, calm, almost intimate. We have learned your voice. We know your thoughts, your fear, your hesitation, your curiosity. And now we know your name. A shiver ran down my spine. The forest had crossed a line, a boundary I didn't realize existed. It wasn't just observing anymore. It was aware of me, and I was aware that I could no longer hide from it. I wanted to turn back. I tried to, really. My feet stumbled, slipped, and I spun around, desperate to find the path I had come from. But the forest was no longer simple. The trees shifted subtly, just enough to confuse me. Branches angled differently, shadows fell in places they hadn't before, and every path I took seemed to loop back subtly, inexorably, until I was in the center again. And it called my name. Jason. Deeper. I swallowed, feeling the tight coil of fear in my chest loosen slightly into curiosity. Foolish curiosity. The kind that makes people walk into shadows even when they know something is waiting. I had to know. I had to see who or what was doing this. Why, I whispered, why me? Because you hear, you respond, you think. You are aware, it said. The words didn't feel like they were spoken, they were breathed, felt, pressed into the spaces between my ears, slipping inside me. Others come and they do not hear. They wander confused and leave, but you stay. I took another step carefully, my eyes scanning. Nothing. Nothing but trees, mist, and shifting shadows. And yet I felt it all around me, the attention, the scrutiny, the expectation. Expectation, I echoed, unsure why I was speaking aloud at all. Yes, it said, we expect you to follow, to respond, to engage, to understand. The forest is not simply trees and wind, Jason. It is something older, something patient, something that collects those who notice, those who speak, those who answer. The words made my skin crawl. I wanted to run, but every instinct in me was drowned out by the same compulsion I had felt since the voices began. To answer, to move, to keep engaging. I walked forward. The forest seemed to part slightly for me, or perhaps I imagined it. My heart hammered, my lungs burned. Every sound, the snap of a twig, the whisper of the wind, was magnified. And then the voices started again, layered now, weaving sentences together, learning from every word I spoke. What do you carry, Jason? My pack, I said. Supplies, food, I'm prepared. Yes, it said, but what else? What else do you carry inside yourself? Fear, regret, memories you cannot escape. Speak them aloud. I paused, hands shaking. My thoughts spilled over despite my hesitation. I carry guilt for things I didn't do, things I should have done, things I cannot fix. A long silence followed, and then it said softly, almost kindly, we understand. We do not judge, we only remember, we collect. And now you are part of the collection. But more than that, Jason, you are known. The word known reverberated through me. Not just observed, not just heard, but known. Every secret thought, every hesitation, every fear had been cataloged. And yet it was patient, waiting, coaxing me forward. Deeper, it said again. I wanted to argue. I wanted to resist, but something inside me, a part I didn't recognize, moved forward. Not blindly, but compelled, curious, desperate to see, to understand, to know what it meant that the forest knew my name. As I moved, the forest changed around me. Shadows lengthened unnaturally, twisting in ways that shouldn't exist. The mist thickened, clinging to my legs, curling around my pack, pressing against my face like a living thing. And the voices, oh, the voices. They were everywhere now, overlapping, layering, forming full sentences that described me, my thoughts, my movements before I had even acted. You wonder if you are losing yourself, it said. Yes, I admitted aloud. I feel different, like I'm not entirely me anymore. And yet you are still Jason, it said. You are still aware, you are still curious, and that is why we call you deeper. That is why we beckon. Deeper, the word echoed in my mind, not as a suggestion, not as a command, but as a gentle, insistent pull. And I realized I was walking willingly now. Not entirely willingly, perhaps, but I was moving towards something I could not define, something I could not resist. Will I be safe? I asked, voice trembling. You will be known, it said, and that is safety of a kind, not the safety of silence or ignorance, but the safety of being remembered, observed, understood. Come, Jason, step forward, do not resist. It is time. I stepped. My boots sank into damp moss, roots, mud, and the forest seemed to open slightly ahead. Not a clearing, not a path, but a space. A place where shadows twisted with light, where the air felt alive, breathing with me. See, it said, this is where you belong, where all who hear, all who answer, all who notice come. I paused, my breath visible in the mist. I looked around, no one was there, and yet the feeling of presence was absolute, watching, waiting, patient, endless. You are not alone, it said again. Not now, not ever, we know your name, and because we know it, Jason, we know you. The words wrapped around me, settled in my chest like a weight I couldn't lift. I realized then that I didn't want to run, not fully. The forest had drawn me in, claimed me, and I could feel it deep in my bones. It was patient, it was ancient, it was alive, and it knew me, all of me. I took another step forward, and the voices shifted with it. Layered sentences forming intricate questions, observations, acknowledgments of every fear, every hesitation. I spoke, answering automatically, almost robotically, and the forest listened, learned, absorbed. I was part of it now, I could not escape, and yet the fear was mingled with a strange, dizzying wonder, to be known, to be observed, to be understood. And then the voice, singular now, soft, intimate, almost affectionate, whispered, Jason, come deeper. And I did. I didn't look back, I didn't resist. Every instinct, every rational thought screamed at me to run, to flee, to find the path I'd lost. But the forest had my name, my voice, my fears, and I answered. Deeper into the mist, deeper into the shadows, deeper into the knowing. I was lost, and yet I had never felt so seen. I found it half buried beneath a tangle of roots, leaning against a fallen pine like it had been left there deliberately. The camera was scratched, the lens cracked, a splinter of the strap fraying in the damp moss. I hesitated, running my fingers over it, half expecting it to snap into dust. And yet it felt solid, heavy, as if it still held something inside, something that shouldn't be forgotten. I picked it up and brushed the dirt away. The screen flickered faintly, dim but alive. A few buttons clicked when I pressed them, and then I saw it. Hours of footage, stored inside despite the damage, waiting. I didn't know whose hands had held this or why it had been left here, but I felt the pull of it immediately. Curiosity is dangerous, but it's a hunger I can't resist. I set the camera on a rock and turned it on fully. The first clip opened, a view from somewhere deep in these woods. Trees stretching in endless columns, sunlight streaking through the branches, birds calling somewhere beyond sight. Nothing unusual at first, just the forest, the wind, the way the leaves trembled like whispers. And then a figure appeared. Not immediately. It lingered at the edge of the frame, just a shadow between two trees, barely moving. I leaned closer, squinting, heart tightening. I knew instinctively it wasn't supposed to be there, and yet it moved with the gentlest, most deliberate grace, almost like it was floating. I froze. My fingers shook over the buttons. The figure stepped closer. Still nothing distinct, no face, no clear outline, just something that didn't belong. And then, without warning, it vanished. I paused the footage, tried to rationalize it. Maybe a trick of the light. Maybe my own eyes wanted to see something. But there was a hum in my chest, a tightening in my throat, a sense that whatever had been there had noticed me noticing. The next clip began automatically. More trees. The same shadow, now a little clearer, moving differently, scanning, watching. Sometimes the camera moved as though carried by someone, then it set itself down. I saw footprints in the mud, but they led nowhere, stopping mid-step, as if whoever, or whatever, had walked this path had simply vanished. I swallowed. My hands were clammy. The footage showed nothing else, no one else, no trail back to civilization. And yet I couldn't turn it off. I couldn't stop looking. It wasn't just curiosity. It was recognition. A low, creeping knowledge that I was stepping into something older than me, something patient, something that had been waiting. And now it had found me. I tried to rationalize again. Maybe someone had left the camera here as a warning. Maybe it was an experiment, some prank, some twisted documentary. But there was no sound of laughter, no signatures in the trees, no hint of another human presence. Only me, the camera, and the forest. The next clip began. The camera swayed as though carried by a hand, then placed down again. And then I saw it clearly. A figure, pale, featureless, standing at the edge of a clearing, watching. It didn't move like a human, and yet it was deliberate, intentional. Every moment of it made my skin crawl, and I could feel it even through the small screen, the sense that this thing had awareness. I paused it, hands trembling. Breathed in the damp air, felt the pressure of the trees pressing closer. The forest seemed alive around me. Leaves rustled without wind. Branches bent slightly, almost as if pointing. The hum of insects shifted into a subtle rhythm like a heartbeat. And somewhere in the distance, I thought I heard a faint snap, footsteps. But I was alone. The next clip revealed more. The figure had moved closer to the camera. The frame shook slightly. The shadow lingered, stretched, shifted unnaturally, and then, I swear, I saw something behind it, something darker, something too precise to be natural. A second presence, barely perceptible, watching, waiting. I felt my breath catch in my chest. My instincts screamed at me to leave, to throw the camera away, to run and never look back. But I couldn't. I couldn't stop. I had to see what was on the next clip, even though every rational part of me begged me not to. The footage continued, and then I saw faces, or the absence of faces. Figures that twisted at impossible angles, heads tilting, limbs bending the wrong way, moving through the trees with a patience that felt alive, predatory. My stomach turned, my pulse quickened, but I pressed play. I had to know. Then unexpectedly, the camera turned to me. The perspective shifted as though someone, or something, was filming from behind. My own face, reflected through the cracked lens, appeared on the screen. Not the camera recording, not the first-person view, but my face, frozen in fear. And then the shadow appeared behind me, closer than ever, blurred, indistinct, yet undeniably there. I spun around. Nothing. Only the forest, silent, still, watching. My heart pounded like a drum. I wanted to throw the camera to destroy it, but I couldn't. It was a link. A bridge to whatever had been moving through these woods, waiting, patient, unseen, yet known. Another clip began. The shadow moved again. This time it lingered longer, closer, almost acknowledging the cameras and my presence. And I realized with a sudden, cold clarity, the camera wasn't just recording the past. It was aware. It was capturing not only what had happened, but what was happening. Every sound, every movement, every heartbeat. And somehow it was aware of me. I set the camera down on the mossy ground, half expecting it to shatter or die. But it hummed softly, alive, almost responsive. And the forest pressed in closer. Shadows deepened. Branches shifted. I felt watched from every angle. The footage was not just images now. It was a presence, a consciousness. I wanted to leave. I wanted to run. And yet a part of me, an irrational, foolish part, stepped forward and pressed play on the next clip. The figure moved slowly, deliberately. It didn't rush. It didn't hide. It just came closer, aware. And then, for a brief moment, I thought it looked at me. Not through the lens, not through the screen, but at me. A weightless, knowing gaze that pierced through the boundaries between the footage and the forest around me. I stumbled backward. The forest seemed impossibly still, almost waiting. My hands shook, my breath came fast. The camera, it still hummed, still alive, waiting, watching. And in that moment I understood. Whoever, or whatever, had held this camera before me had left more than images. They had left a bridge, a thread connecting the living forest to this device, and through it to me. I wanted to throw it, destroy it, run screaming into the sunlight. But the forest held me in place. Shadows lengthened. Mist curled around my legs. And the camera, it waited patiently, silently, humming. I realized then that I wasn't just watching the forest anymore. The forest was watching me. And the camera, the broken, cracked, impossible camera, was its eyes. Hours passed, I don't know how long. I sat there on the damp moss, heart hammering, hands frozen over the device. Every sound was magnified, a twig snapping, leaves rustling, my own shallow breaths. And every time I glanced at the screen, the figure was closer, always patient, always aware. I didn't move. I couldn't. The forest was alive with attention, and the camera held it, focused it, waiting for something I didn't understand. And I knew deep in my bones that when I finally rose to leave, when I finally turned to escape, it would still be there, watching, waiting, patient, knowing. And somehow, I felt it knew my name already. I didn't sleep that night. The camera sat beside me, humming faintly on the forest floor. Every now and then I would glance at it, half expecting it to move, to react, to speak. The screen remained dark, silent, waiting. But in my mind, the images from the first clips replayed endlessly. The shadow, the stillness, the sense that it knew I was watching. I tried to convince myself to leave. I even picked it up once, felt its weight in my hands, considered tossing it into the underbrush. But some part of me, stubborn, foolish, kept it close. I needed to see what came next. I needed to know what had happened to the people who had carried this camera before me. Morning came gray and damp, the forest heavy with mist. I pressed play on the next footage. The camera view shifted immediately, rough, handheld, a little shaky. The footage was from earlier, before the shadow appeared. A group of 4 or maybe 5 people moved through the woods. They laughed quietly, spoke softly, trying to stay calm. Their boots sank slightly into mud, the sound muffled, leaves crunching underfoot. At first it seemed ordinary. Hikers, lost or wandering, recording their adventure. And yet the air felt different, even through the small screen. There was tension beneath their words, a quiet unease that made me lean closer. Then the first sign appeared, a shape between the trees, far off at first, almost impossible to notice. A dark blur, taller than any human. It didn't move naturally, not like someone walking. It simply drifted, observed, followed. One of the hikers, a woman with a ponytail, paused suddenly. She frowned, squinting toward the trees. "Did anyone hear that?" she asked. Her voice was soft, tentative. The others shook their heads, but the camera trembled slightly, as though whoever was holding it had felt the same unease. Minutes passed in silence. The figures in the footage moved cautiously, avoiding broken branches, whispering to each other. And always, just at the edge of the frame, that dark presence lingered. Sometimes it ducked behind a tree, sometimes it stepped slightly forward, closer, but never fully revealed. I felt a chill run down my spine. My hands gripped the camera tightly. The forest around me seemed to echo their fear, even though I was alone. I couldn't look away. I couldn't. The footage progressed. One of the hikers, a tall man in a gray jacket, stopped to check a map. The camera tilted slightly as someone crouched, trying to steady the image. And then the shadow moved again. Closer now, careful, deliberate. Not running, not hiding, just pursuing. The hikers didn't see it at first. Their conversation continued in low tones, jokes meant to ease tension, small talk about lunch and distance. But the shadow grew bolder. It stayed just behind the trees, always partially hidden, always aware. I noticed something subtle. The way the camera captured it, how it lingered in the footage was unnatural. Sometimes the edges of the shadow blurred, stretching, as if it didn't belong in three-dimensional space. Sometimes it reflected light in odd ways, darker than dark, absorbing more than it should. And occasionally the air itself seemed to shift around it, leaves parting without wind, branches bending slightly toward the path. One of the hikers finally noticed. A quiet gasp, a snap of a twig. The ponytail woman froze, head turning slowly. There's someone following us," she whispered. Her voice trembled. The others stopped, scanning, calling out. "Hello, who's there?" No answer came. Only the forest. Only the camera capturing every hesitation, every fear-filled glance. The footage continued. The group moved faster now, glancing behind them more often. Footsteps in the mud far behind, but not quite. They didn't sound human, not exactly. Hollow, distorted, uneven, yet unmistakably alive. I realized with a cold shock that the sound wasn't consistent. Sometimes it sped up, sometimes it slowed, always keeping pace with the group, always keeping them aware that they were being followed. I pressed pause, my fingers trembling, breath deep. The air around me was too thick, too still. It felt aware. I pressed play again. The group stumbled into a small clearing. Sunlight flickered through the trees, but it did nothing to make the shadow clearer. If anything, it became more unreal, a stain of darkness between the trunks. The hikers whispered frantically, voices rising and falling, small cries and gasps punctuating the sound of boots in mud. Then the first one vanished. Not entirely, not in the sense of leaving the frame, just gone. One moment she was moving cautiously along the path, the next, the camera captured only the others. The ponytail woman's hand flew to her mouth, eyes wide. She called out. No response. The camera wavered as the others searched frantically. The shadow had shifted, closer now, almost merging with the trees. It wasn't running, not chasing with speed, but it was patient, calculated, waiting for the next opportunity. And the forest seemed to bend around it, absorbing her absence, masking it, erasing the small evidence of her footsteps. I felt my stomach twist. My heart thumped so loud I thought it might echo through the mist. I wanted to turn the camera off. I wanted to throw it into the mud. But I couldn't. I needed to see the rest. I needed to know if anyone made it out. The footage became fragmented after that. Shaky shots, close-ups of faces twisted with fear, feet running through mud, branches slapping at arms. Whispers of voices, low, indistinct, terrified, rose in the audio. Sometimes I could swear. The camera tilted on its own, turning slowly to capture the shadow in fuller view, as if it knew I was watching. Another figure vanished. A man, his voice calling out, unanswered, echoing into the forest. The remaining two froze in panic, looking in all directions, trying to rationalize, trying to find an explanation. But the forest offered none. Only silence, only shadows, only the camera recording it all. And then the impossible happened. The shadow appeared in the foreground. Not behind the trees this time, not partially hidden, but fully present, though still featureless, unnatural, impossible. It didn't move violently. It didn't rush. It just stood, watching. And the group, paralyzed by fear, stumbled back, falling to their knees. The footage wobbled, the camera shaking in their hands, capturing the surreal horror in every frame. I felt nausea, a creeping cold dread that wrapped around my chest and stomach, squeezing. And still I watched. My mind wanted to deny it. My instincts screamed to look away. But some part of me, the part that had picked up the camera in the first place, needed to know, needed to see the full truth. The shadow didn't attack. It never needed to. Its presence alone was enough to unravel everything. The group screamed, voices overlapping in panic, calling out names, pleading, sobbing. And then silence. The footage ended abruptly. No resolution, no final frame, no fade out. Just static, the screen flickering faintly. I sat in the midst of the real forest. Heart hammering, the camera's faint hum blending with the whisper of leaves. The shadow in the footage lingered in my mind, patient, aware, eternal. I couldn't tell how much time passed. The forest itself felt different now, heavier, thicker, almost alive in the wrong way. And I knew something, this wasn't just history. The camera hadn't only recorded the past, it had recorded the presence, the awareness, and somehow it was still connected, waiting, watching. I set the camera down, hands trembling. The mist coiled around my legs, branches scratched against my jacket, and through it all I could feel the weight of something unseen, patient, waiting for the next move. I realized then that the camera had done more than capture images. It had captured intent. Something in the forest, something beyond human understanding, was alive in these recordings, and it had noticed me. I wanted to leave. I wanted to run. I wanted to escape while I still could, but I knew deep down that leaving wouldn't free me. Not now, not ever. The camera had opened a door, and the forest it had stepped through. I didn't sleep again that night. I couldn't. The events of the previous day, the images burned into my mind, refused to let me rest. The camera sat on the table, its small red light faintly blinking, as if impatient, waiting for me to return. I wanted to ignore it, to walk away, to leave the forest behind me and forget everything. But a part of me, stubborn, foolish, needed to see the last recording, needed to know what the camera had seen that no one else could. I turned it on, my hands shaking slightly. The screen flickered and the first frame appeared, static, gray and grainy, the way a tape always begins when it's been unused for a long time. Then the footage sharpened. The forest appeared again, thick, shadowed, almost suffocating. At first the clip seemed ordinary. A hand appeared in frame, holding the camera. The group's voices echoed faintly but muffled, distorted by time. The mud, the branches, the low hum of distant birds, it all felt familiar. Safe, almost. And then the camera moved. Slowly, too deliberately. Its gaze shifted from the familiar path, away from the trees the hikers had followed and toward something else. Something that made my stomach tighten. I couldn't see it at first. Just a glimmer, a suggestion, a subtle movement that didn't belong. And then it stepped into view. Not fully, not clearly, but enough. Enough to break something in my mind. It wasn't human. It was an animal, not entirely at least. It hovered at the edge of perception, a shape both familiar and wrong. Too tall, too thin, limbs bending at unnatural angles. Its face. I couldn't see a face. Not eyes, not mouth, nothing. And yet I felt it watching, fully, directly, like it understood me. The camera wavered in the footage, unsteady, as though the person holding it had noticed it too. Their breathing became audible, ragged, panicked. A voice called out, a whisper frantic and urgent. "Don't look at it, don't. And then I realized the camera was tilting, slowly, turning. Not by hand, not by movement of the person filming. The forest itself seemed to shift beneath it. Trees leaned impossibly, branches bending as if alive, guiding the lens toward whatever it wanted me to see. The air in my room thickened. I could feel the forest pressing in around me. The camera's red light seemed to pulse in rhythm with my heart. I told myself it was just a tape, just a recording, just a story trapped in a box. But I could feel it, the presence. Patient, deliberate, aware. Waiting. Watching. And then the impossible happened. The camera focused on something in the underbrush. I couldn't look away, though every instinct screamed at me to turn off the device. There was a figure there. Or not a figure. I don't know what to call it. It was both solid and unreal, something that existed between dimensions, between reality and memory. It tilted its head, or something like a head. It seemed to study the camera, to understand it, to understand me. And then, with a subtle movement, it stepped forward. Not fast, not aggressive, just forward. And the camera followed. Not by hand, not by choice, but because it had to, because it was compelled. The last clip was longer than any of the previous ones, but every second stretched impossibly, like time itself had slowed. The forest around the camera changed. Shadows deepened, colors drained. The underbrush seemed to writhe subtly, small shapes moving just beyond focus. Branches scraped, leaves whispered, but no wind blew. And all the while the figure moved, patient, aware, inevitable. The hikers in the footage reacted finally. Screams, cries, panic breaking loose. But it didn't chase. It didn't need to. Its presence alone was enough to unravel them. And then one by one they vanished. Not running, not dragged, not taken in any way I could understand. Just gone. Footprints disappeared mid-step, voices silenced, laughter and panic erased as though they had never existed. I felt my stomach churn. My hands shook. I couldn't breathe properly. And yet I couldn't turn away. The camera had become more than a recording device. It was a portal, a witness, a messenger of something that should not exist. The figure, whatever it was, paused, and then I noticed it. Something about the angle, something about the way the camera framed it. It knew I was watching. Not the hikers in the footage. Not anyone who had come before me. Me, here, now. A cold dread seeped into my bones. My fingers hovered over the buttons, desperate to stop it, but my body refused to act. The screen filled with the impossible figure. Its limbs stretched, blurred, bending in ways they shouldn't. And I could feel it, thinking, observing, aware. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. I wanted to smash the camera against the floor. And then abruptly it happened. The clip cut off. Static, blackness, silence. The red light on the camera pulsed once and stopped. I sat there for long minutes, staring at the device, trying to convince myself it was over, that it had only been a tape, that I had imagined the shapes, the movement, the sense of being watched. But I knew it wasn't over. I could feel it. I could feel the presence lingering in the room, in the forest outside, in the very air around me. The camera had shown me something impossible, something that shouldn't exist, and it had left me with a warning I couldn't articulate. I picked up the camera again. The casing was cold, heavier than it should have been. The screen remained black, silent, as if it had nothing more to say. And yet I could feel it waiting, patient, knowing. I didn't know how long I sat there. Hours, minutes. Time felt fluid, broken. And then I heard it, a faint noise like static, like the camera breathing. Not from the device, not from the forest outside, but from somewhere inside my head. A whisper, almost imperceptible. "Do you see me?" I froze, heart hammering, sweat breaking across my skin. The room felt impossibly still, heavy, like the forest had followed me here. The camera's red light blinked faintly. The figure from the footage was not in the screen anymore, and yet I knew it had not left. Not really. Not ever. I placed the camera down gently as if it could bite. And I realized something. This wasn't just a recording. It was a message, a presence. Something alive in the footage, reaching out, watching, waiting, patient. The final clip had shown me the impossible. And it had left me with one certainty. The camera would not stop. It would not be ignored. Whatever had been captured within it, whatever had been following those hikers, whatever had moved impossibly through the forest, it had now noticed me. And I knew in the deepest part of me that this was only the beginning.